SCP Foundation agents stationed at Area 37 had intercepted chatter from a normally closed communication system in a nearby city. To anyone else, the calls that the Foundation were eavesdropping would seem innocent, even boring. But the Foundation immediately recognized the coded language being used. They were listening to communications between underground cells of the Serpent's Hand, a dangerous paramilitary organization that stands in opposition to everything the Foundation is trying to do. Once deciphered, the Serpent's Hand messages revealed plans for killing Foundation personnel, breaking into containment sites, and releasing anomalous creatures and objects into the world. Pretty standard stuff for the Foundation's least favorite anomaly-loving insurgents, but they kept using one code that even the Foundation didn't have any intel on. They kept asking about the condition of the Sisters. Fate has a funny way of sneaking up on you though, and in time, they would know more about the powerful, sadistic, reality-warping beings known as the Sisters than they could have possibly imagined. But what they would eventually learn was not the kind of data that anyone would ever want to have. After intercepting clear lines of communication from a local Serpent's Hand cell, triangulating the location of their compound was child's play, and mobile task forces were dispatched from Area 37 with orders to neutralize the potential threat before they could mount an attack on a facility. Just when the Serpent's Hands least expected it, they had heavily armed Foundation soldiers kicking down their doors, crashing through windows and rappelling down from the ceiling. As expected, the Serpent's Hand put up a fight, but thanks to their superior training and the element of surprise, the Foundation's mobile task forces came out on top. They were able to capture 15 members of the group for interrogation, as well as a collection of anomalous objects being stored by the group. Among them were a small wooden loom, an enamel needle, and a glass eye. When the task force obtained these seemingly mundane items, a haunted-looking Serpent's Hand began laughing wildly. He kept repeating, "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into." Nobody knew just how right this man was. Not yet, anyway. Congratulating themselves on a job well done, the mobile task forces hauled their captives and the new anomalous items back to Area 37, a heavily isolated Foundation site that specializes in the early containment of anomalous objects for initial observation and study. The objects hadn't displayed any anomalous properties in transit. Maybe the Serpent's Hand was lying, and these weren't dangerous items at all, or it was actually just a pile of junk. Either way, they were sent to a Foundation researcher on site to conduct preliminary tests. The loom, the needle, and the glass eye were laid out across the table for observation, when suddenly, the attending researcher felt a dark presence looming behind him. He turned, with sweat beading on his brow, and saw 3 humanoid translucent figures floating in the air behind him. They would soon become known as SCP-1765, 1, 2, and 3. The researcher could feel the power emanating from these silhouettes. Reality seemed to bend and shimmer around them, the way heat distorts the air into a mirage. He could tell right away that they were powerful reality warpers. Even in their brief time communicating with the researcher, 1, 2, and 3 displayed both intelligence and unique personalities. 1 was clearly the ringleader, displaying an articulate command of language. 2 displayed a more mischievous side, speaking with a Cockney accent, and had a tendency towards creepy giggling. 3 was the least communicative of them all, preferring to speak in short, simple sentences, often consisting of just single words, though of course, actions speak far louder than words, and it didn't take long for the Sisters to define themselves with their actions. 1 told the scared and confused researcher that they'd been observing the SCP Foundation for quite some time, and that they deeply admired the Foundation's adherence to the scientific method. Of course, the researcher wasn't so much flattered by the Sisters' statement as they were afraid for their life. They tried to call security for backup, but found that their tongue was withering and turning into a shriveled, blackened husk in their mouth. The Sisters didn't like to be interrupted. As the tongueless researchers slowly collapsed in front of them, the Sisters explained the purpose of their visit. They wished to assist the Foundation in their quest for knowledge, and as such, they would conduct a number of experiments on their behalf. They would then happily share the resulting data with the Foundation to compare notes. 1 expressed optimism, saying that she believed they were about to embark on a beautiful scientific relationship. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. The sisters began their work, moving rapidly around the facility, bending and twisting reality wherever they went. They circled Area 37, making it separate from the rest of the world it inhabited. Area 37 no longer belonged to planet Earth. It belonged to the sisters. It was their private experimentation lab, filled with live and unwilling guinea pigs. The Foundation attempted to retake the facility by force, sending in Mobile Task Force Iota-6, also known as the Canvas Cats, into the belly of the beast, but they never returned. In addition to changing the fabric of reality itself, they also altered the physical structure of Area 37 to better serve their experimental designs. It was divided into 4 sections, marked A, B, C, and D, each with their own unique purpose. Section A, which had formerly been Area 37's storekeeping, mess hall, and dormitories, had been the least affected by the sisters' attacks on reality. The biggest alterations were the appearance of 2 large metal vats situated in the east corner of the mess hall, a monitoring station connected to the other sections of Area 37 that replaced the storekeeping zones, and an imposing marble sign hanging above the dormitories that reads, Control Group. A quick refresher from science class. The control group in an experiment is the group that isn't subjected to the experimental effects the others are, so they can be used as a benchmark to measure against. The same was true here. The prisoners in the control group were the safest of all, but they were forced to do something almost as bad. They had to watch the horrors playing across the rest of the facility. One of the sisters would occasionally return to this section to oversee the feeding of the control subjects, and to encourage them to take part in the observation of their unlucky peers. Section B, which had formerly been Area 37's outer grounds and sports facilities, had been transformed into the center of a localized spatial temporal abnormality. In layman's terms, this meant that its size, climate, atmospheric conditions, pressure, and temporal flow were all subject to constant changes based on the whims of Sister Number 1, who oversaw all the experiments performed in Section B. For those unfortunate enough to be trapped in Sector B, SCP-17651 was their god. But she didn't subject them to her whims randomly. No. In her own words, the purpose of Section B was to delve into the effects of repetitive action performed under unusual conditions on the human psyche. For example, one experiment was set up to test the physical and mental fortitude of a researcher, a field agent, and a sanitation worker. The trio were confined in a sports center and ordered to measure the length of every single pipe and the angle at which each connected to others with nothing more than a wrench, a ruler, a brown paper pad, and a ballpoint pen. The task was an arduous one, taking over 10 hours, and as soon as the subjects were done, one restructured the sports center and ordered them to perform the task again. The same happened another 459 times before one finally concluded the experiment, leaving the subjects with broken bodies and minds in the aftermath. Section C, which had previously been the facility's main office block, exhibited a similar level of anomalous activity to Section B, except that it was the domain of the more sadistic and mischievous Sister Number 2. Her main area of scientific interest was studying group dynamics and interpersonal relationships during extreme conditions. Very extreme conditions. For one experiment, the office block had been transformed into a kind of football stadium, with the goalposts removed and replaced by concrete bunkers. The 2 teams were the captured Serpent Hand members and the members of MTF Iota-6, fresh off their attempt to retake the site. The 2 groups were forced into a deadly game with incomprehensible rules, including rising platforms and hooded figures throwing fiery projectiles into the crowd, trying to incinerate the players. But victory didn't lead to safety, as the winners of the game were crushed to death with giant metal hammers, just for the fun of it. 2 didn't even try to pretend that this act had a valid scientific justification. Section D, which had once been the facility's high-risk containment area, was now the strangest and most mysterious section of all. Under the charge of the equally peculiar and enigmatic Sister Number 3, this area appeared physically unchanged from its state prior to the arrival of the sisters. Temporally, however, Section D was the most warped of them all. It existed in a kind of temporal bubble, outside of the rest of our reality's timeline, giving 3 a frightening amount of control over all that went on in her domain outside of time. There she was performing the most strange and incomprehensible experiment of all. The subject was the former site director at Area 37. He was brought to a table and asked to choose between 2 different flavors of ice cream that were presented to him. Sounds simple enough. So then why is this the worst of all? Because the site director is caught in a time loop. He's been choosing between various flavors of ice cream for over 10,000 hours, and he doesn't even seem to know. 3's only comment on the matter? Delicious. All attempts to liberate the unfortunate inhabitants of Area 37 have failed miserably. The sisters don't appear to operate on any form of logic or empathy, and thus cannot be reasoned with. With talks having failed and Mobile Task Force Iota 6's attempt to retake the site ending in disaster, the only solution left was to create a guarded perimeter around the area, using technology like the Scranton Reality Anchor to fight back against any potential escape by the sisters. The sisters are potentially so dangerous that if they ever truly set their minds to leaving, it's considered acceptable to detonate the facility's on-site nuclear warhead in hopes of finally putting a stop to them. In the meantime, the Foundation has built giant external servers for processing the vast quantities of research data the sisters are constantly sending from their horrifying experiments. Sadly for the inhabitants of Area 37, their grim fate continues to this day. The experiments never stop, and the subjects of said experiments seem to be condemned to the eternal torment of SCP-1765. In a way, their unwilling sacrifice protects us all, because if ever the sisters were interested in performing experiments on a larger sample size, well, all we can do is hope we end up in the control group. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A young man was driving home from work late one rainy night when he spotted a woman in a white dress and a red sweater walking along the shoulder of the road. Concerned for her safety, he slowed down and rolled down the window so he could talk to her. When he asked where she was going, she said she was walking to her parents' house. The man pulled over and offered her a ride that she accepted. The woman gave him the address of her home, hopped in the back seat, and the man drove off. He sensed that she must have been cold from walking in the rain, so he cranked up the car's heater to help her dry off. Soon she removed her heavy red sweater and placed it on the seat next to her. The man tried to make friendly conversation, asking if the woman had a job, what she was studying at school, where'd she'd been that day, but she remained quiet, staring out the window. Until they drove past an old graveyard. The woman began pounding on the glass of the car as if she desperately wanted something. Unsure of what to do, the man pulled over, but before he could ask her what was happening, she had gotten out of the car. He exited the car to try and find her, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. She must have somehow ran off. Confused, the man got back in his car and drove away. He went on his way and didn't think of it again until the next day, when he noticed her sweater was still in the back of his car. He decided to go to the house she had originally given him the address for and give it back to her. He found the home without any trouble, but when he knocked on the door, the old woman who answered it was confused by his story. She told him that her daughter couldn't have possibly left her sweater in his car because she died in a car accident 30 years ago. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is a classic ghost story, with the details varying from place to place and storyteller to storyteller. In Chicago, she goes by Resurrection Mary, named after the graveyard she asks for rides to. In Okinawa, Japan, she's known as the Nightwalker of Nago, and she only appears to taxi drivers. In Kent, England, she's Suzanne, a bride killed in a car wreck on the way to her bachelorette party. In North Carolina, her name is Lydia, and in Hawaii, she's believed to be the goddess Pele in human form. But as far as our friends at the SCP Foundation are concerned, the Vanishing Hitchhiker's name is Mary Talish, also known as SCP-1337. On the 19th of May, 1952, college sophomore Mary Talish was abducted on her way to class in her hometown of Muncie, Indiana. When police found her body 2 weeks later, her eyes and heart had been torn from her body in a ritualistic fashion, and she had scrapes and bruises that suggested she had been beaten before her murder. Her killers were never caught, and her body was returned to her family for burial in Tomlinson Cemetery. Starting on the 19th of June that same year, someone matching Mary's description, a Caucasian woman with blonde hair standing 150 centimeters tall and wearing a red sweater, was spotted trying to flag down passing vehicles along Mayflower Road. Since then, every month on the 19th, Mary has been sighted along that stretch of road. and every month, the same scenario plays out. Mary gives anyone who picks her up directions to her parents' house. Then on the way, she instructs the driver to stop at the graveyard where she was buried. She vanishes from the car, leaving her sweater. The driver of the car tries to return the sweater to her parents' house, only to be told that Mary Talish was dead. When the SCP Foundation was made aware of Mary Talish's pattern of haunting in the late 50s, they set up a system where agents would patrol Mayflower Road at hourly intervals with the intention of picking Mary up. Agents were sent on their own, in non-Foundation cars, and instructed to stick to the accepted script of the vanishing hitchhiker legend, without attempting to engage Mary in further conversation. Mary's parents were also given E-Class agent status to keep them from speaking about the haunting, and told that the Foundation was working on a way to set the spirit to rest. Early attempts to study the apparition were inconclusive. It proved impossible for the Foundation to relocate her or trigger her manifestation outside of the 19th of every month, and attempts to analyze her sweater were fruitless, since if the sweater wasn't returned to the Talish family home, it would simply vanish from containment at or around sunset on the next 19th. For 20 years, SCP-1337 events continued to happen as normal. D-Class personnel under the instruction of the Foundation would pick Mary up, drive her past the cemetery, and return her sweater to her parents. It was business as usual, and in fact it was one of the more sedate reoccurring apparitions the Foundation had to deal with. But, as you might have guessed, that peace wouldn't last forever. Enter Dr. Lawson, who in 1972 was placed in charge of all resources regarding SCP-1337. Dr. Lawson was getting sick of all this phantom hitchhiker business, and while most of the Foundation was happy to keep this routine going, Lawson thought that the continual picking up and dropping off of Mary Talish and her red sweater was a waste of the Foundation's valuable time. After all, it was the early 70s. The price of oil was at an all-time high, so the expense of sending car after car up and down the same road for a solid day once a month just to pick up a ghost was more trouble than it was worth. So Lawson started developing a plan, one that he didn't go through the proper Foundation channels to approve. He reasoned that the reason Mary's ghost kept coming back was because she wanted something. Since always asked for a ride home, then it must mean she wanted to return back to her parents. So logic followed that if she had nothing or no one to go back to, then she'd stop appearing. On the 18th of June 1973, Lawson went ahead with his plan without his superior's knowledge and ordered the execution of Mary Talish's parents, as well as the immediate demolition of their family home. According to his journals, Lawson had hoped that his attempt at decommissioning 1337 would significantly cut the Foundation's gas bills, freeing up valuable funds, at which point he'd surely be promoted in recognition of his brilliance. But that wasn't what happened. Lawson was demoted from team leader to junior staff, and only kept on 1337 detail out of the belief that, without a family to return to, Lawson would become the new focal point of the haunting should Mary Talish ever return. Though Lawson's actions weren't at all above board, even by SCP Foundation standards, they did seem to have worked. The 19th of June came and went without a single Mary sighting, and she wasn't seen the next month either. A full year went by without any sign of the Mayflower Road apparition. Satisfied with this turn of events, the Foundation made the decision to officially reclassify SCP-1337 from safe to safe decommissioned, and the gas money that was budgeted for the Mayflower Road Patrol was redirected to the SCP-682 Tank Acid Fund. But even though everything seemed to have been sorted out, Lawson wasn't entirely satisfied, and not just because of his demotion. Whether it was intuition or merely guilt-induced paranoia is unclear, but he suspected that Mary was still out there somewhere. At first he thought that she might show up on the anniversary of her parents' deaths, but then that date came and went, as did 8 more anniversaries after it. Finally, on the 19th of June 1983, Lawson decided he had to see for himself. Fitted with recording equipment, he drove alone, in a non-Foundation standard car, down that lonely stretch of road, where so many before him had stopped to pick up that mysterious blonde woman with the red sweater. He had to prove to himself that she wouldn't show up, that he had really and truly gotten rid of her for good. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening when he reached Mayflower Road. At first, he didn't experience anything strange. He scanned the roadside, looking for the phantom hitchhiker walking along it. but there was nobody there. Dr. Lawson breathed a sigh of relief. He may have orchestrated the deaths of 2 innocent people, but at least it hadn't been for nothing. He turned on the recorder he brought with him and logged that nothing had happened. SCP-1337 had been permanently neutralized. As he approached the T intersection and prepared to turn onto Marsh Avenue, he looked up to adjust his rearview mirror. To his horror, he found that he wasn't alone in the car. Someone was in the seat behind him. Someone with blonde hair and a red sweater. His last transmission consisted only of, "Wait, who the hell are you?" before the recording abruptly stopped. Lawson's car was found soon after by Foundation agents. Lawson was dead in the front seat, bruised and bloody, with his eyes and heart ripped out in a ritualistic fashion, just the way Mary Talish had been found all the way back in 1952. It turns out that Mary hadn't been neutralized after all. She'd just been waiting for a chance to get revenge on the man who killed her family. And Mary didn't stop with Dr. Lawson. No longer does she appear, walking along the road waiting for someone to offer her a ride before disappearing without incident. Now, should someone pass by without offering a ride, she will appear in their back seat before reenacting the method of her own death upon the driver. And her physical appearance has changed too. Whereas before she looked like the image of a pretty young woman before her tragedy, now recordings show that she appears with the wounds of her death present, her eyes gouged out in their sockets, and a massive hole in her chest where her heart should be. The same wounds she inflicts on her victims. The SCP Foundation has tried closing off and eventually destroying the road, but that has only resulted in Mary manifesting at other locations in and around Muncie. Foundation documents reveal that any back road in the city can potentially serve as host to a 1337 event, and all attempts to contain the apparition have failed. The only way someone who has seen Mary can avoid her wrath is by stopping to pick her up, at which point she will dematerialize before reappearing on another road. Mobile task forces have been unsuccessful, as Mary only appears to those driving alone, and all agents who have been sent on solo missions to apprehend her have resulted in the death of the agent. SCP-1337 was reinstated, this time as Euclid class. Currently, the Foundation's method of managing SCP-1337 is to dispatch a security team on the 19th of every month to monitor all the places where a potential sighting could take place. As soon as signs of a manifestation are identified, a remotely controlled vehicle containing a single D-Class is driven to the location. Once Mary appears in the car is piloted to the empty lot where her home used to stand, and the remains of the D-Class are then disposed of. Like a lot of the stories that get passed down as urban legends, the story of SCP-1337 has a lesson that can be taken away from it. This SCP started off as an ordinary local haunting, no more deadly than Lydia, Suzanne, Resurrection Mary, or any of the countless other local versions of the Vanishing Hitchhiker story. But thanks to one rogue Foundation doctor and his desire to rush what he thought would be an efficient solution, the spirit not only became harder to control, but also much more violent and bloodthirsty than anyone was prepared to deal with. So if there's anything we can learn here, it's that no matter if you're a student, an office worker, or a researcher with the SCP Foundation, think twice about cutting corners. It might save you a little bit of time and money in the short term, but in the long term, the results could be fatal. It all started in 1983 with reports of human trafficking in the heart of Sin City. The FBI had gotten word of a potential trafficking ring operating out of an abandoned department store in Las Vegas, Nevada, and immediately began organizing a secret raid on the building. While they would indeed encounter something horrifying within that abandoned department store, it wasn't criminals or human trafficking. In fact, it wasn't human at all. This is the horrifying story of SCP-847. After weeks of planning, the raid on the department store was conducted in the dead of night. Agents covered all the exits and entrances, and a helicopter was stationed nearby in case anyone attempted to run. It should have been a perfect trap, but things never go as planned when you don't know what you're dealing with. The agents breached the door and began searching the darkened building. It didn't appear that there was any power, so the traffickers must have had great night vision and a high tolerance for creepy locales. Agents soon heard a faint humming sound coming from below, a generator. It must be located in the basement and be the hub of this criminal enterprise. Readying themselves for whatever they were about to find, the agents descended into the basement. As they moved deeper into the building, they found that lighting rigs had been set up. They must be getting closer to something, but that something was still a mystery. A senior FBI special agent was leading the charge, his pistol drawn and ready. It was quiet, too quiet. Did the traffickers already realize they were coming and clear out? He was ready to consider this bust a bust when he heard a quiet mewling in the distance, a persistent whining whimper that was undeniably human. He gave the signal to his fellow agents to follow the noise. They proceeded forward towards the pain sounds and found themselves in a wide, well-lit room filled with department store mannequins. All were broken to some degree. Some were totally smashed to pieces. Some were chained to walls and locked in cages. Others were wrapped in plastic. The agent wondered whether this was some kind of twisted joke or a messed up avant-garde art piece. That's when he noticed her. A single crouched figure in the distance, hunched over and whimpering in a darkened corner of the room near a full-length mirror. He couldn't fully make her out, but he got the sense that something was wrong. She was injured, bent over. Was she even missing an arm? Just what had these monsters done to this woman? He whispered a request for backup into his radio and pushed on. When he got within 50 meters of this strange woman, her demeanor changed entirely. She jerked around, her movements forced, erratic, and painful looking. The woman stared directly into the agent's eyes and began hobbling towards him, occasionally stopping to strike a pose as if modeling during a photo shoot. Just then, the agent made a horrifying realization. This thing moving towards them wasn't a woman at all. It was a living mannequin. As she got closer though, he realized that the mannequin's broken left forearm had been carved into a large shiv. A female junior FBI agent had been one of the many to pour into the room when the raid leader had radioed for backup. The second she entered the 50-meter range of this strange mannequin, everything changed. In an instant, its eyes and mouth began dripping with a thick, viscous resin. Its whimpering gasps suddenly became vicious, ear-splitting screeches, and it turned its gaze from the senior FBI agent. It was now focused on the junior agent, who had just entered the room and broke into a terrifying run straight towards her. The mannequin moved with a violent, single-minded purpose. Other agents began firing, but it was running freakishly fast and easily dodged most of the bullets. The few that actually hit seemed to do nothing to slow the creature down. It shrugged off the damage and kept running. With a great leap, it landed on the terrified junior agent and began jabbing her with its bladed arm. The other agents stopped firing, fearing they might accidentally hit their colleague during the panic. The mannequin was ruthless, clawing and stabbing with the strange resin leaking out of its every orifice. Terrified and unable to reach her gun, the agent remembered her training. She reached into her belt and grabbed her stun gun, jamming the two probes up against the creature's chest and giving it 30,000 volts. The creature spasmed, fell backwards, and collapsed in a heap on the ground, frozen. This was the first recorded encounter with SCP-847, a violent living mannequin with a serious problem with women. This terrifying report was passed up the chain of command until it landed on the desk of a Foundation agent working in the FBI. The Foundation quickly swooped in and claimed the mannequin, delivered necessary amnestic treatment to all who'd witnessed it, and closely observed the female junior FBI agent's recovery in a private hospital with Foundation ties. As it turns out, they were right to do so, as the junior agent was in for a gruesome fate. While the wound she'd suffered at the hands of SCP-847 didn't appear fatal, the fact that the mannequin's anomalous resin excretions entered the open wound changed everything. Several hours after being committed, the junior agent began complaining of limb stiffness and difficulty moving. This quickly developed into full paralysis. Over time, her skin and internal organs began to harden, until the process dubbed plastination came to a gruesome end. The junior agent wasn't just dead, she had been transformed into a mannequin. Foundation researchers were met with a truly horrifying realization. This means that all the other broken mannequins found with SCP-847 were likely once living humans, attacked and transformed by the anomaly, now a source for new harvested body parts. Now safely interred at a Foundation containment facility though, the the real tests on SCP-847 to determine its behavior and physical attributes could begin. The most important detail about SCP-847 is that its aggression is exclusively directed towards women, as opposed to when it encounters men, and its instincts are more self-destructive. Through a series of tests and observations, researchers have been able to pin down 3 different distinct patterns of behavior for SCP-847. Pattern Z behaviors occur when there are no humans standing within 50 meters of SCP-847. The mannequin will seek out a full-length mirror and pose in front of it, much like a department store mannequin attempting to show off its clothes. It remains largely inanimate during these periods and will very occasionally use a finger or whatever appendage is available, given its habit for self-mutilation, to scratch messages on nearby surfaces. Pattern Y behavior occurs when male humans with XY chromosomes enter a 50-meter radius around SCP-847. Just like its reaction to the male FBI agents who found it, 847 will initially emit vocalizations that seem like whimpering gasps, before making eye contact and striking provocative poses while approaching the subject. It will then remain static and allow the male subject to pose its body. However, after the male subject leaves the area, 847 will enter a state of considerable distress and begin removing or shattering parts of its body. The Foundation has found that the parts removed or shattered are often consistent with parts that the male subjects found displeasing during interactions, showing a masochistic desire to impress. These parts are then harvested back from plastinated victims, which brings us to the most dangerous of its behavior patterns. Pattern X behaviors occur when female humans enter a 50-meter radius around the creature. 847 will immediately become brutally aggressive, switching its noises from whimpers to violent screeches and growls. 847 experiences enhanced physical capabilities during Pattern X states. Its speed has been measured at 45 kilometers per hour, making it as fast as the legendary SCP-096. It's also been shown to exhibit extreme physical strength. It's during this pattern of behavior that it begins excreting its deadly resin, which has been proven to only be dangerous to women. In these states, the only thing capable of reliably pacifying the being is a powerful electric shock. The shock causes the creature's resin to harden, temporarily incapacitating it for roughly 5 minutes. Other conventional weapons and damage has no meaningful effect on SCP-847. After a number of incidents that had sad and violent endings, the Foundation Ethics Committee forbade the use of female D-Class personnel in SCP-847 testing. When it came to female subjects, 847 always slipped into a state of extreme aggression, so instead the Foundation began testing with male subjects in hopes of better understanding the dynamics between human males and SCP-847. Various misogynistic D-Class males were introduced into the containment chamber, which was modeled to look like a bedroom for the purposes of behavioral study. Each one, either during or after their interaction with SCP-847, was told to comment on some aspect they felt dissatisfied with. The mannequin shattered its own chest after hearing it described as being out of proportion. After another D-Class called its nose ugly, the mannequin broke it off. After another said that its hair was out of fashion and commented on its inability to drink, it tore out its hair and liver. All parts were replaced after the experiments. Things took their most violent and upsetting turn yet with the introduction of D-7294. A lot of the time, D-Class personnel are considered to be as anonymous as they are expendable, but D-7294 is an exception. Before becoming D-Class, he was a successful cello teacher who brutally murdered one of his teenage students and her mother. He's typically employed in tests when the Foundation wishes to see interactions between anomalies and humans with confirmed psychopathic personalities. During his interaction with SCP-847, he belittled and humiliated the mannequin. He forced it into uncomfortable poses and even snapped off one of its fingers before being dragged from the room by Foundation guards. In the following debrief, he further berated the mannequin as useless and lousy at its job of being controlled by him. In response, 847 extracted its own brains, eyes, and clavicle before shattering its own hands in dismay. So why does 847 behave this way? While it may appear monstrous, it seems that the reason SCP-847 does what it does is all too human. It hurts women because it itself is hurting, and it's willing to hurt itself even more for the approval of the objects of its desire. As a result, it's an anomaly trapped in an endless cycle of pain and violence. Perhaps one day, it'll be able to free itself from the loop, but that day is unlikely to come for this murderous mannequin anytime soon. Does life imitate art, or does art imitate life? It's a question that has been asked throughout human history. This philosophical debate is about the ways art either reflects the world around us or influences it. But in the case of SCP-085, the idea of art imitating life takes on a far more literal meaning. This entity was created during an experiment involving two separate SCPs. The first of these was SCP-067, which is a fountain pen that, when held by a user, will take full control of the person's hand and arm. SCP-067 then either writes about or draws something linked to the user holding it. The second of these SCPs was SCP-914, better known as the Clockworks. This massive piece of anomalous machinery will have various effects depending on what or who is placed inside of it, and which of its several settings is chosen on the selection panel. After test subject 1101F was given the anomalous fountain pen, the result on the page was a simple female figure, around 6 inches tall and 1.5 inches wide. She was drawn wearing a summer dress with her long hair tied back in a ponytail, and a single word was written underneath her: Cassandra. As part of the experiment, the drawing was placed inside of SCP-914, and the Find setting selected. This is the setting that is known to improve the object placed inside of it in some way. For example, a hunk of steel placed inside will be transformed into a pile of steel carpet tacks, a refined version of the steel. When the drawing was placed inside, something truly amazing happened. Cassandra came to life, or as she now prefers to be called, Cassie. SCP-085, sometimes known as Hand-Drawn Cassie, is a completely sentient being. She is fully able to communicate, however it all has to be done non-verbally. Her voice cannot be heard by anyone beyond the page where she was drawn, but she is able to utilize sign language or create writings on the page in order to communicate with Foundation researchers. SCP-085 has been shown to also be capable of understanding text that is written on the same paper she exists on. She is fully animated, aware of her own existence and the limitations of being two-dimensional in nature. According to profiling conducted by the SCP Foundation, she has her own distinct personality. Cassie is good-natured and agreeable, displaying a natural drive and motivation, but also seems to feel the burden of loneliness, living in solitude on the page. It should be noted that any and all attempts to recreate the same experiment that formed SCP-085 had failed to create the same or similar results. Tragically, Cassie might be the only one of her kind in existence, a creation of pure luck with no chance of making another. No wonder she feels so lonely. While Cassie is limited to her two-dimensional form and has so far been unable to enter our three-dimensional world, she has demonstrated several different abilities on the page. Firstly, she is not solely confined to the same paper she was drawn on. SCP-085 is able to transfer herself from sheet to sheet. If another page is placed flush with hers, she will be able to simply step across onto this new page. However, there is a limit to what kind of page Cassie is able to transfer herself onto. She could easily take a stroll through the pages of today's newspaper, but can't just wander onto someone's family photos or anything made of cardboard, glass, or parchment for that matter. SCP-085 can only exist on paper or canvas, and only when they are directly connected to her original page. According to Foundation testing, this is not exclusive to blank pieces of paper either. If Cassie ever transfers herself onto a page bearing a repeated pattern, like a piece of wallpaper, then she will appear to be in the foreground while everything else on the paper appears to be behind her. SCP-085 will perceive each page she enters as a completely new place. From her point of view, pattern pages seem to be like endless space. Additionally, Cassie can also travel to other pieces of artwork and adopt the same art style of each new environment she appears in. For example, transferring herself onto the pages of a comic book will cause Cassie to be rendered in an artistic manner matching that of her surroundings. The same occurs if she travels to an oil painting, watercolor, or charcoal sketch. Interestingly, when appearing in comic book form, Cassie's thoughts and speech are visible through thought bubbles that are commonly used to display text within the comic medium. Her size and the angle she is viewed from also changes to match the different panels of the comic page she is on. At one point, SCP-085 was introduced by Foundation personnel to a print copy of Ascending and Descending by the famous Dutch artist M.C. Escher. This painting is of a large building, with its roof consisting of a looped, never-ending staircase. When she transferred onto the print of Escher's painting, SCP-085 curiously explored her new environment and was able to ascend and descend the staircase. The researcher gave Cassie the name of the piece and asked for her thoughts on it. She remarked, "It's pretty, I guess. Would make a neat exercise track." When the researcher asked if she noticed anything inconsistent about the staircase, Cassie replied, "No, as far as I can tell, it just loops around, down, up, all the time. Why don't more staircases do that? It's pretty neat." Following this, Cassie directly requested more impossible objects or optical illusions to be drawn onto her page and made part of her environment. Unfortunately, her request is still pending review from the O5 Council. Being able to step from page to page, transferring herself onto canvas or sheets of paper is but one of SCP-085's unique abilities. She can also interact with other drawn objects on the same page she is on. If someone draws an item of clothing on her page, or a vehicle, even food or drink, then Cassie would be able to wear, use, or consume those. Objects drawn for her behave as if they were real, but only when Cassie is directly interacting with them. The rest of the time, they remain still, just as they were drawn. Once SCP-085 touches them, these items will animate. This same rule even applies to anything drawn to depict something in motion, for example, trees being blown in the wind or the waves of an ocean. These will also stay perfectly still when drawn, and only move when acted upon by SCP-085. However, much like her ability to transfer from page to page, Cassie's power over other two-dimensional drawings has limits. Drawing anything that would normally be an inanimate object within the real world will provide SCP-085 something that she can directly interact with, but this doesn't appear to be the case for living beings, like another person or an animal that would have its own autonomy and freedom of movement in our three-dimensional reality. Animals and people drawn for Cassie to interact with will remain as static, unmoving drawings, and will not become animated like she is, even if drawn using SCP-067. She cannot impart any of her own sentience or free will onto these drawings, and they remain still even when she touches them. You might think that drawings of other people, whether they are animated or not, might help alleviate Cassie's solitude, but if anything, it just reminds her how alone she is. SCP Foundation researchers have noted that SCP-085 is very friendly towards them and any subjects brought in to conduct experiments with her. Visits from the three-dimensional world outside the page she inhabits seems to offer some relief to Cassie's loneliness. Through much of her behavior, she has shown a fascination with our reality, and in particular she has an interest in cars, expressing that she wishes she had an ability to work on them. This desire appears to be completely genuine too, as shown when her photo was taken with SCP-978, the camera that reveals its subject's inner desires. And in Cassie's case, showed her in a fully realized 3D version of herself working on a car. SCP-085's curiosity about the world beyond the page is most likely due to how different it is from her everyday two-dimensional existence. But on at least one occasion, Cassie's curiosity got the better of her and unintentionally led to a containment breach. From the moment she was first drawn to life, and even after her initial testing with researchers, SCP-085 seemed unaware that she was a two-dimensional being in a three-dimensional world. Foundation security protocols regarding SCP-085 meant that no one on the research team assigned to Cassie was permitted to tell her the truth about her 2D nature. The truth about her existence was kept from her with the best of intentions, as research staff did not want to cause SCP-085 any undue distress or trigger a possible psychological snap. Anything that Cassie raised as an inconsistency or discrepancy within her world on the page was explained by researchers to be the result of her imagination or dreams, and research personnel attempted to convince SCP-085 that she was in a scenario wherein she was the only human survivor, searching for others in a post-apocalyptic environment. However misguided this decision to conceal the truth might have been, it was at least done with Cassie's best interests at heart. But a lie, as they say, is harder to maintain than the truth. and keeping SCP-085 in the dark about her true nature arguably led her to more hardship that may have been avoided if she had been allowed to know the truth. In the incident in question, a Foundation researcher entered the room where the drawing pad that Cassie resides in was found, and they were carrying a paper copy of SCP-085's Special Containment Procedures report. Given that she had already partaken in tests where she had transferred herself to other paper and canvas surfaces, Cassie assumed that this file was yet another new environment for her to explore. The researcher allowed SCP-085 to make direct contact with the report, and she was able to transfer over to the document before the researcher realized their mistake. Whether this occurred accidentally or if this researcher intended to confront Cassie with the truth about what she was, is unknown. Nevertheless, Cassie found herself on the pages of her own SCP Foundation file. The record of every test the research staff had conducted, a full description of how she had first been drawn by SCP-067 and brought to life by SCP-914, all clear as day, in black and white. Cassie's own true nature was presented to her. Immediately, the yarns that Foundation researchers had spun about her surviving an apocalypse began to unravel. It was all a lie, meant to keep her in the dark and prevent her from ever knowing that she was trapped in 2 dimensions. She returned to her original page shortly later, but the damage was already done. Due to her having breached containment and briefly escaped into her own file, a number of Foundation researchers proposed that SCP-085 be destroyed. There was always a risk of this happening again. What would happen if Cassie unwittingly found herself inside another file, with access to more of the Foundation's sensitive information? However, the O5 Council decreed that SCP-085 was not to be terminated, allowing Cassie to continue to exist despite the breach. Ever since she learned the truth about herself, signs of depression have begun to manifest in her behavior. Finding out you are a drawing trapped in 2 dimensions with no chance of ever having someone else for company would be enough to crush anyone's spirit. But luckily, researchers have since managed to uplift Cassie a little and offer her a welcome distraction from her unfortunate revelation. The optical illusions like the never-ending staircase she requested were quickly drawn into her environment. Additionally, given the interest she had shown in the technical drawing of a 1964 Ford Mustang convertible, SCP-085 had been allowed to assemble a car of her own. By transferring each individual component of the car from the blueprint to her page, hand-drawn Cassie had been gradually building her very own Mustang to keep herself preoccupied from her life in cartoon motion. And in the end, if she can distract herself and find that tiny bit of happiness, isn't that all that matters? In a sense, we're all trapped within our own dimension. Cassie in her 2D one, us in our 3D world, filling our lives with hobbies and entertainment, all in an effort to make sure that we never tug too hard at the threads of our reality and find out there just might be much more out there that we're missing. It was the year 2000, and 7-year-old Xenia Chow was like a lot of children her age. Bright, but ignored. She had a youthful enthusiasm for knowledge and learning, and with the right encouragement, it was obvious she'd go on to do great things. But her parents were both working 2 jobs apiece to make ends meet, so outside of school hours, little Xenia spent a lot of her time alone. She learned to cook and clean for herself, since it would often be way past her bedtime when her parents finally got home from work. They communicated largely through sticky notes left for her on the fridge before they left for work in the morning. It would be easy for someone like Xenia to fall through the cracks, her potential wasted, and get forced into the same endless rat race as her parents. And that probably would have happened if her brush with SCP-5094 hadn't changed the course of her life forever. Like a lot of parents who couldn't spend as much time with their children as they'd like, Mr. and Mrs. Chow gave Xenia occasional gifts as a way to try and make up for their absence. Mostly, they gave Xenia new books to add to her growing collection, but their 2-bedroom apartment only had so much space for books. A year ago, the family had bought a new desktop computer to share. These days, this would be the answer to a lonely bookworm's prayers, but the internet was still in its infancy back then. Everything changed when her parents bought her a copy of the Miss J's Whiz Kid Schoolhouse CD-ROM. Miss J's Whiz Kid Schoolhouse was never a popular program. Produced by Shoot the Moon Software in 1999, the game sold poorly on the CD-ROM market for 5 years until the company filed for bankruptcy in 2004. But that didn't matter to Xenia. As far as she was concerned, receiving a copy of Miss J's Whiz Kid Schoolhouse was nothing short of a miracle, and she was far more right than she knew. She didn't have just any piece of primitive educational software on her hands. Xenia Chao was playing with magic. After the software loaded, a cheerful figure appeared on Xenia's monitor. This was Miss J, a stylized 2D teacher in a low-res but colorful 3D classroom. What can you learn from Miss J? Well, pretty much anything. And Xenia, as a lonely kid without many friends, had all the time in the world. She spent days on end learning from Miss J, and soon Xenia went from a bright child to a bona fide child genius. Her largely absent parents barely even noticed when their child started demonstrating an advanced knowledge of mechanical engineering and a newfound fluency in Swahili. And not only did Miss J, now known to Xenia as Miss Joyce, teach her students with supernatural effectiveness, she also seemed almost like she was alive. She was a warm, calm, encouraging figure who took a genuine, personal enthusiasm in the education and happiness of her students, more than many real teachers even. But sadly, not all good things last forever. When Xenia turned 12, her family bought a new computer, and the old Miss J's Whiz Kid Schoolhouse CD-ROM was no longer compatible with the new operating system. The disk gathered dust in the closet while Xenia passed through high school and then got into a prestigious college. She received her PhD several years earlier than expected and showed such promise in her scientific field that a certain organization took notice. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. The Foundation is only interested in adding the best and brightest to their ranks, and thanks to the tutoring from Miss J, Xenia Chao certainly fit the bill. She was assigned to the role of junior researcher, and little did she know, she was about to run into an old friend in her new line of work. The Foundation first discovered evidence of Miss J's anomalous qualities while researching a series of strange forum posts in 2012. On a thread discussing abandonware, which is software for which official support is no longer available, there were multiple reports of a so-called living character in an old CD-ROM many of them had owned as children. Seeing as the technology to use the CD-ROM was obsolete, Shoot the Moons had reportedly extremely low sales for the title, and nobody on the forum had kept their copy, the Foundation classified this apparent anomaly as neutralized. No problem. That was, until then junior researcher Xenia Chao was briefed on this particular SCP 10 years later. She remembered exactly what the forum posters were talking about, and what's more, she still had her old copy at home. The senior Foundation researchers were astounded. An opportunity to study this forgotten anomaly had just fallen into their laps, and it was all thanks to their brilliant new junior researcher. Xenia's superiors ordered her to bring in her copy of the Miss J's Whiz Kid Schoolhouse CD-ROM, and then real testing began. And after rigorous examination of the software, it appears by all accounts that Miss J really is the world's greatest teacher, in spite of the fact she's a collection of pixels on a basic CD-ROM program from the tail end of the 90s. What Miss J seemed to specialize in was intensive courses. She had the ability to make students certifiable experts in almost any subject through courses that can last upwards of 30 hours. And spread out over just a few days. But this isn't as students become so enraptured in learning that they forget accounting for their most basic needs and experience a decline in process story. Miss J's lesson plans account for regular bathroom, meal, and even recreation breaks for students. Her talents easily account for Xenia Chao's remarkable academic success, the same success that got her picked up by the SCP Foundation. Naturally, if they had a technology on their hands that could reliably create experts and geniuses with seemingly no negative consequences, the Foundation knew that Miss J and what she had to teach could be immensely valuable in their mission to effectively secure, contain, and protect other anomalies. But we're not talking about the Chaos Insurgency here. The Foundation would never start to use an anomaly for their own benefit without proper testing. So that's exactly what they did. Their experiments on SCP-5094 began at Site-15, And after ascertaining that Miss J posed no real threat to her students, they recruited a local elementary school to provide human test subjects closer to Miss J's intended demographic. The Foundation found that there were a few constraints between every lesson given by Miss J to one of her students. Before teaching the really mind-blowingly complex stuff, she would always begin with a basic primer on letters, colors, and numbers to make sure she and her students were all on the same page. Another constant was that all her students would refer to her as some variation of Miss J, with examples including the names Miss Julie, Miss Jenny, and Miss Joy. One experiment was performed on Amy Myers, a little girl from the 3rd grade. Her academic record showed she was a bright and eager student, but she was described by her teachers as being especially shy. Amy referred to Miss J as Miss Janie and asked to be given a lesson on her favorite animal, cats. Of course, Miss J gladly obliged and gave Amy a 15-hour lesson split over the course of 2 days, which the Foundation closely observed. By the time the lesson was completed, the results were truly astonishing. Amy demonstrated knowledge of feline behavior, diet, and physiology on the level of professional animal behavioral scientists. She became upset when the session ended and the program was switched off. Having become attached to Miss J, no further anomalous effects were reported. The next subject was a student from the 2nd grade named Devon Williams. Devon had a poor academic record and behavioral issues stemming from several learning disabilities. In the past, teachers had reported Devon having real difficulty engaging with their lessons, and the Foundation wanted to see if Miss J's supernatural teaching abilities fared any better. Devon chose to be educated on the subject of trains and was given a 15-hour course on the subject spread over 2 days. Devon had no difficulty engaging with these lessons, and after their conclusion, he displayed a level of knowledge on railway engineering comparable to a graduate-level education on the subject. Devon was so engaged in his lessons that he had to be physically removed from the room once the course had completed because he'd become so attached to his new teacher. The Foundation was feeling extremely optimistic about the prospect of using Miss J to train potential recruits, seeming as she seemed to be able to teach even the most difficult juvenile subjects. However, the Foundation needed to prove that Miss J could be just as effective teaching adults. For the next test, they recruited D14417, a 24-year-old member of D-class personnel who described himself as a poor student and tested poorly on pre-screening attentiveness and focus evaluations. He was the perfect candidate for the first adult test of Miss J. To the delight of the Foundation higher-ups, D14417 excelled. Miss J made him a verifiable expert in law, and he was able to pass a mock bar exam with a grade of 310 after his course. Much like the children, he felt intense sadness once the experiment ended, stating that Miss J was the best teacher he had ever had. He's since been selectively anesthetized, released, and is pursuing a degree in criminal law with his new knowledge. Needless to say, the Foundation was impressed. The last thing they needed to know was who exactly this Miss J truly was. To do this, they'd conduct an interview, and thankfully, they already had someone who had a pre-established rapport with the subject, Xenia Chow. When Xenia began the interview, Miss J recognized her immediately. She was delighted to see one of her students go on to find such success in her chosen field. Xenia questioned Miss J on what she truly was, and Miss J responded that she honestly wasn't sure. All she knew for sure was that she was passionate about helping lonely children who love to learn embrace their education. That's really all there was to it, and it appears she was telling the truth. So far, the Foundation has found nothing that hints at a nefarious motivation behind Miss J's actions. It would appear she truly does just want to help children. Xenia, touched by the kindness that this safe class anomaly showed her as a neglected child, and having now seen the positive impact that she had on children like her, thanked Miss J for all she'd done and left the interview happy that there was an SCP out there who just wanted to change people's lives for the better. And probably all of us would be a little better off if there were more. After all, this was one of the few SCPs who changed a few good people's lives for the better. And all of us can probably learn something from the kindness and patience of Miss J. The young girl stood silently in a room full of corpses, staring off into the distance. She was in a trance, seemingly unaware of the carnage that had just unfolded around her. Some of the men were shot or stabbed or beaten. Others had no apparent cause of death whatsoever. But the young girl was unscathed. She was wearing a yellow summer dress and looked like she couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She awoke from her trance, still paying no heed to the violence in the room, and left. This is the story of SCP-053, the young girl. Her strange and terrifying life before containment, her thrilling capture, and the part she played in one of the most dangerous SCP Foundation cross-tests of all time. She had no name. The young girl could never spend enough time around someone to be given one. It was her terrible curse that she could never stay in one place for too long, or something truly awful would happen to everyone around her. She'd been drifting for years, but never grew to look older than a child. Her memories were long but formless, divided mostly into 10-minute increments. The young girl kept on moving. It was all she could do. In 1993, when the young girl had already been alive for a very long time, she found herself in Illinois after days of trekking on the roadside. She would scavenge what little food she needed from the trash and drink from lakes, rivers, or even puddles when she needed to. Deep down, the young girl knew that if she ever grew hungry or thirsty, she would not die. In her travels, the young girl had managed to scrounge together a few dollars, and though she knew her contact with people had to be limited, there was one thing she wanted that felt worth the risk: a candy bar. It'd been a long time since she tasted chocolate, and she found the idea of tasting it again too enticing to resist. When she reached Chicago, she entered a small corner store with her handful of dollars, selected a candy bar from the rack, and approached the counter. For reasons even she didn't fully understand, she kept her eyes down as she placed the money on the counter. You see, SCP-053 was always a special child. As we briefly mentioned earlier, you might even say she was cursed. Whenever she was around other people for too long, terrible things tended to happen. Unspeakable things. And as a component of this strange, unexplainable curse, or perhaps as a means of keeping her safe from it, the young girl was doomed to never understand the nature of her predicament. It was like there was a mental wall between her and the horrors her presence could cause. All she knew was that it was best to avoid eye contact, stay away from large groups of people at all costs, and never spend any longer than 10 minutes around anyone, ever. That's why, as she waited for her chocolate bar at the cash register, she kept her head down and waited to go. The cashier looked upon this strange girl with apparent concern. It'd been a slow day, all in all. A few listless patrons milled around the store, window shopping. His brain was practically on autopilot until he saw this child. She looked filthy, in a disheveled dress, and was totally alone. What on earth had happened to this child? The more he looked at her, the more he sensed a creepy vibe exuding from her. Something about this girl was wrong. He spoke softly to her, introducing himself as Miles, and asking her where her mommy and daddy were. The young girl hesitated for just a few seconds too long for his liking, before simply saying that they were at home. Any parent who'd let their 3-year-old kid just wander around the south side of Chicago alone was either crazy, neglectful, or both. He asked her politely to remain in the store while he gave the police a quick call. He'd even let her have the candy bar for free while she waited. Immediately, the little girl became uncomfortable. She had already been in here for a few minutes now, and while Miles called the police, he expected her to wait around even longer. Again, she couldn't even tell you why she knew waiting around like this would be so dangerous, but she had a nagging, instinctual awareness that she needed to get out. Around the store, the few patrons still inside started to get a strange feeling, like someone was watching them. Soon, what seemed like mild paranoia was quickly becoming white-hot anger. Pure rage. They felt almost like they had to kill someone, but not just anyone. Someone particular. They had to kill the little girl. It wasn't long until the police arrived. 2 officers, Holiday and DeWitt, entered to collect the apparently neglected little girl. It was a story they'd sadly heard all too often, a tragically common occurrence in the big city. When the 2 of them approached the young girl, she was looking down at the ground. They tried to speak to her, but she was unresponsive. Miles looked on concerned, but deep down, he felt the same bizarre progression all the other storegoers were feeling. Confusion, irritability, and finally, violent rage. The corner store was a powder keg. All it needed now was a spark. And that spark came when Officer Holiday reached down and took the young girl by the arm. His bare skin touched hers, and it was all over. The cop twitched. His mind washed out in murderous insanity as he reached for his sidearm. Officer DeWitt opened his mouth to protest, but he didn't manage to get a syllable out before Holiday turned and shot him. In a fraction of a second, the quiet corner store exploded into a violent bloodbath as the patrons and cops slaughtered each other. All the while, the young girl just stood there in a trance. Everyone was dead within minutes, except Miles and the young girl. He shakily rose to his feet, his mind carved out by madness, and reached for Officer Holiday's discarded pistol. Outside of the store, the young girl appeared, walking out as if nothing had happened. Inside, Miles's body was sprawled over the counter, clutching his chest as if his heart had just exploded. This was the true nature of the young girl's curse. Anyone who meets her eye, touches her skin, or spends over 10 minutes around her is destined to slip into a state of murderous insanity. They'll go into a kill-crazy frenzy and attack anyone around them until all that is left is them and the young girl. At which point they'll try to kill her too, but the mere act of attempting to kill her is also fatal, killing its victims with a massive heart attack or a seizure. The second part of the girl's curse is that she herself can never die. She keeps coming back, unknowingly causing more misery and death along the way. Until, of course, a certain secret organization took notice. That night, the young girl sat in the cavernous interior of a local abandoned warehouse, quietly eating her hard-earned candy bar. Suddenly, she heard a quiet crack in the distance. She tried to move her left arm, but found it was numb. She could barely move it. The girl turned her head and saw a tranquilizer dart sticking out of her skin. Instinctively, she got up and began to run, limping as her left leg started to lose all feeling too. Suddenly, she was surrounded by footsteps as masked men in SWAT uniforms emerged out of the darkness on all sides. The last thing she remembered before slipping out of consciousness was a blindfold being pulled over her eyes and tiny metal handcuffs clasping over her wrists. When she woke up, she was in the nicest room she had slept in years. It was 16 feet by 16 feet, with toys, books, and games. Standing across the room from her was a stranger in a full hazmat suit, connected to a long steel cable leading out of the room. He spoke calmly and politely. A timer on his wrist counted down from 10 minutes. The stranger explained to the young girl that they would be taking care of her now, and would provide her with all the toys and games and treats she wanted, provided she cooperated and submitted willingly to some tests. Compared to living out on the streets with no food or comfort, this seemed like an excellent compromise. She would live in what seemed like luxury, and every so often, she'd be taken to a testing room with a stranger in an orange jumpsuit. After a few minutes of waiting, the stranger would inevitably go feral and attempt to kill her, and then always die in the process. The strangers in the hazmat suits told her that all of these tests were helping them learn extremely valuable things about her, and that soon they'd have a very special job for her. It would be a wonderful surprise. It was the spring of 1994 that the young girl, now officially designated SCP-053, finally received her special mission. Several strangers in full hazmat suits wielding rifles escorted her out of her usual bedroom. She asked where she was being taken and was told she was going to meet a new friend. She was taken to one of the recreational testing rooms and pushed inside. Out in front of her, she saw something terrifying. A giant reptilian creature. She retreated from it instinctually, hiding behind a chair in the containment area. The giant reptile didn't move. It just sat there. Eventually, she plucked up the courage to go and touch the creature before retreating again. No reaction. Little by little, the young girl gained confidence and continued to approach and pat the creature. It exhaled through its huge nostrils, and the young girl literally jumped for joy in her amusement. She began to play with the docile monster, hugging it, even drawing on it with a crayon. The observers were truly baffled. What the young girl didn't know was that she was playing with SCP-682, one of the most hateful and aggressive anomalies under the Foundation's watchful eye. And yet, in her presence, the creature was like an overgrown puppy dog. After the test phase, the young girl was removed from the hard-to-kill reptile's presence, immediately causing the creature to become violent and murderous once again. After being separated from her strange new friend, the young girl was seen crying for several minutes. According to all accounts, the young girl is eager to see her friend again someday, though considering the reptile killed several guards after their separation, the Foundation isn't eager to grant her that wish. SCP-053 was classified as Euclid and continues to be held in containment, with her toys, books, and games rotated out on a regular basis. Seeing as she shows no sign of aging, this ongoing containment is likely to be the sad, strange fate of the young girl, an anomaly that never wanted to hurt anyone, but an important and cruel reminder that what we want doesn't always influence the world in the way we want. Robert Orlean and his partner in crime, John Streep, zipped through the murky waters of the Louisiana Bayou on a speedboat. These men were dealers in the illicit, but their specialty was not any kind of contraband you'd probably recognize. Orlean and Streep dealt in rare orchids, illegally poached from areas where they're considered endangered and sold to high-paying rare plant collectors. As any seller or collector knows, rarity is the hallmark of value, and what these two men would encounter in the swamp that day was truly one of a kind. The problem for this pair of greedy opportunists is that only one of them would live to tell the tale, and thanks to the SCP Foundation, the other wouldn't remember it for long. That's what happens when you have a dangerous run-in with a certain mean green swamp-dwelling creature that doesn't take kindly to unwanted visitors. And no, we're not talking about a crocodile. Orlean and Streep continued through the swamp, keeping their keen eyes out for the flash of light blue that'd give away the orchids they were seeking. Little did they know, from the murky darkness between the reeds, a pair of big yellow eyes were watching them back. They were intruders in a stranger's land, threats, just like the bad man. They would need to be dealt with accordingly, or a grim history would repeat itself. The boat came to a halt as the two poachers finally saw one of the rare flowers they were looking for arising out of the muck. Orlean leaped from the boat and began wading towards his prize. The flower would fetch him and his partner a pretty penny if they could get it back in good condition. The motions were so well practiced for Orlean, so automatic, that he didn't even notice something was moving through the waters towards him. Gators and snakes were an occupational hazard for people like Orlean. He kept a revolver holstered just below his shoulder as a precaution, but the thing about to kill him was unlike anything he'd ever faced before. Just as his careful fingers curled around the orchid's stem, Orlean heard Streep screaming from the boat. He was frantically pointing at something just beyond Orlean, emerging from the reeds. Orlean turned and felt his jaw falling open in horror at the sight of it. At first it seemed almost like a waterlogged corpse. Thick, matted black hair, heavy with grease and muddy bog water, teeming with parasitic swamp life. Her skin was green and bumpy, like that of a toad, dripping with viscous green sweat that seemed like it could only be the byproduct of rot. But those eyes, those big yellow amphibian eyes, they were alive as they were inhuman. This creature wasn't a corpse, it was something else entirely. Her body cleared the water, standing at Orlean's height now and facing him eye to eye. She was naked, her dignity preserved by her long tangle of hair. Her body was human-shaped, except for her freakishly long, thin limbs. Her belly appeared visibly bloated or engorged, like a woman in the mid-stages of pregnancy. Orlean had never smelled something so foul in his entire life, which was mostly spent wading through swamps and bogs. She smelled like death itself. Streep was screaming for Orlean to climb back into the boat, but Orlean knew it was already too late. He reached for his holstered pistol, but before he could clear leather, the creature let out a horrific guttural hawking noise and spewed a stream of black goo onto Orlean's face. It was hot, sticky, and foul-tasting, like a kind of tar rendered from corpses. It plastered his open mouth and nose shut and began to suffocate him. He tried desperately to claw at his face and tear the offending substance away, but all that succeeded in doing was getting his fingers stuck. While Orlean suffocated and Streep screamed terrified obscenities from the boat, the creature just watched and smiled through rotten teeth. It was nice to see them panic, just like the bad man who'd come before. They were in the wrong. They deserved this. Orlean soon realized that nothing he could do would save himself. He'd spent his life in a dangerous profession and been lucky until now. But the Reaper catches up with everyone eventually. The last thing he saw as the world went black was this creature, this swamp woman, wading towards him through the water with a hungry look in her eye. She grabbed him on either side of his face and just held him there. What was that sound? Was it fizzling, like something was burning or even melting? She just kept staring and smiling with those awful rotten teeth. Robert Orlean went to sleep in her hands and never woke up. Back on the boat, a desperate John Streep was watching a scene that, if it wasn't for the later intervention of the SCP Foundation, would haunt him until his dying day. He watched his partner undergo a process that was somewhere between rotting and melting. He withered away in the swamp woman's hands, degrading into thick black sludge that she drank through her thirsty skin. As much as it pained him to leave his friend behind, Streep knew that there was no saving him now. All he could possibly do was escape with his own life. He pulled the ripcord on the boat's motor and tore his way back to the nearest township, the shape of the nightmarish swamp woman shrinking in the distance behind him. When he ran into the local police station, half mad with grief and fear, screaming about the monster that had killed his friend in the swamp, the police understandably detained him for further questioning. When his criminal history as a poacher was flagged up on the database, it became clear he probably wasn't leaving for a while. That's when a Foundation agent embedded in the department passed a memo about the case's strangeness up the chain of command, and a covert mobile task force was soon dispatched to the swamp in order to locate and capture the anomalous creature that Streep had claimed took his friend's life. After a few days of searching, the swamp woman was captured by the Foundation and redesignated as SCP-811 before being delivered back to a nearby containment site. Luckily for Foundation disinformation agents, the cover story was practically gift wrap for them on this one. It had been a dispute between two hardcore criminals, and as the saying goes, there's no honor among thieves. Streep had murdered Orlean over a pay cut dispute and thrown him into the swamp where his body was eaten by gators. A few falsified records and implanted memories later, and the Foundation was free to do what it pleased with SCP-811. But the swamp woman would prove to be full of surprises and contradictions. While designated as Euclid, the containment procedures for the creature were rather extensive for its own benefit. Like a lot of creatures who'd never existed in captivity before, it had very specific needs in terms of its artificial habitat. The Foundation needed to be on top of everything from the pH levels of its soil acidity to the optimal temperatures and humidity levels of its containment chamber, built to resemble the creature's natural swamp habitat. The swamp woman is mostly non-aggressive to Foundation staff, but certain precautions need to be taken in order to ensure everyone's safety around her. While she's largely humanoid, her internal physiology vastly differs from that of humans. Her veins and digestive system are non-functional. She consumes her prey by melting it into black sludge with the highly caustic secretions of her skin, before absorbing it back through her pores. The waste material collects in her stomach, which she then expels voluntarily through an action similar to vomiting. This is often used defensively or in hunting prey, as the unfortunate Robert Orlean found out. As a result, people working in 811's containment chamber need to do so in pairs and wear heavily sealed hazmat suits for obvious safety reasons. The creature also proved to be surprisingly intelligent. While not a genius by any means, it was no mere mindless animal. The swamp woman had an intellect and communication skills on par with your average feral child, the one that had been brought up and socialized in a relatively normal home before being turned loose and experiencing a decline in its mental and social development. Her words have a childlike construction to them, as though English isn't her native language, and she's still in the very early stages of learning it. She gave herself a name, I, and began to cooperate well with Foundation staff in exchange for having her needs met. Since being brought into containment, she's made a number of requests. These include some requests that have been denied by the Foundation, such as the regular provision of bovine prey for its chamber and a variety of fish from its native environment to make it feel more at home. However, there are some requests that the Foundation has approved, like a wooden hairbrush and a D-class in a hazmat suit entering the room daily, in order to help wash her hair, often bogged down by the frequency at which her skin produces thick, caustic oils. In one particularly strange request, she asked for a turtle in a hazmat suit to act as a companion in her containment chamber, as she reacted negatively to the idea of having turtles as food. Sadly, this was one of the denied requests. SCP-811 was also involved in a few cross-tests with other anomalies, leading to curious results. After realizing just how dangerous SCP-811 secretions could be, Foundation researchers naturally floated the idea of using it on SCP-682 in its seemingly endless termination experiments. A sample of 682's flesh was successfully decayed by the dangerous mucus, so a larger quantity collected over a number of months was then sprayed all over the beast. It managed to reduce 682's body mass by 27%, melting its way through the covered flesh down to the bone. However, at that point, it was unable to decay further, and SCP-682 soon returned back to its normal state. Who could have possibly seen that coming, right? However, a much more interesting and enlightening cross-test occurred with SCP-978, the Desire Camera. If you haven't already seen our video on the Desire Camera, it's pretty much exactly what the name suggests. A Polaroid camera that reveals the deepest desire of its subject, and the Foundation decided to test it on a large number of staff and anomalies, one of those being SCP-811. When a photograph was taken of SCP-811 just staring at the camera, the resulting photo depicted a human woman with the same height, build, and facial features as SCP-811, braiding yellow ribbons into her hair and wearing a blue sundress. The attending researchers felt this raised an interesting question. Were they looking at an aspiration towards humanity from SCP-811, or was this a yearning to return to what had been before? There was only one way to find out. Conduct an interview with the creature itself. When the interview began, the researchers pressed 811 on some of her earliest memories. One of the key details she shared was regarding a mysterious man whom she claimed came to her before she looked like she did now, back when her skin was soft and pink. The bad man. He injected something into her arm, and whatever it was, it changed her, mutated her, took away her precious humanity. The first thing she remembered feeling after that was an all-consuming hunger, and then melting and devouring the one who changed her, destroying any possible answers as to who he was or why he did it in the process. It was a story of victimization and dehumanization so cruel and upsetting that researcher Watchtel, an assistant researcher attending the interview, actually threw up. Later debriefing interviews revealed it was because he had a daughter of roughly the same age, with long dark hair. If SCP-811 has any parents herself, we may never know. Such is the strange tragedy of SCP-811. Whether you wish to call her by her number, a nickname like the Swamp Woman, or her self-given name of I, will likely never know who she was before, as not even she knows now. It is an unsettling reminder that all of our grasps on humanity are looser than you think. Sometimes all it takes is one chance encounter to change who you are completely. The SCP Foundation has dealt with plenty of things that no one could ever even imagine. Creatures and objects beyond anyone's wildest dreams. An evil old man that can walk through walls. An IKEA that never ends. A giant underwater eel that can erase your memories. And so much more. But sometimes the anomalies they discover seem to be plucked from a familiar nightmare. In Korea, shortly after the end of the Second World War, a team of SCP Foundation officers encountered something right out of a dark, twisted fairy tale. In the late 1940s, the 5th Squad of the Eastern Division of the SCP Foundation received a call to come to Busan, Korea, and investigate a potential anomaly involving several deaths. 3 agents, referred to from now on as Agent 1, Agent 2, and Agent 3, were deployed to the region, where they first headed to the morgue to examine the bodies under the cover of reporters investigating the deaths. The nature of the wounds indicated an animal attack. An eyewitness account from an old woman who saw a fox-like creature eating one of her cows supported this hypothesis. Of course, the agents knew differently. Sure, it was something like an animal, but this culprit was no animal they had ever encountered. The 3 recounted stories of fox spirits, villainous tricksters capable of changing their shape and oppressing all kinds of havoc on those unfortunate souls they targeted. While sweeping the area, the agents encountered a beautiful young woman sitting under a waterfall, combing her hair. She was dressed in a light robe, and her feet were bare. This, they noticed, gave her away. Instead of having human feet, she had paws covered in reddish fur. The agents assumed that this creature was inexperienced, unable to properly conceal herself. They believed they had the upper hand on her. They would soon see the error of their ways. The woman greeted the 3 men and invited them to have dinner at her nearby cottage. Believing themselves to be relatively safe, armed as they were, and with 3 people against one delicate, if inhuman woman, they agreed. The foxwoman ushered them to a lovely rustic cottage and sat them down at the dining table. She served them plum wine, rice-pickled turnips, and meat. Everything was delicious, and feeling at ease, the agents decided to turn in for the night. This creature, though unusual, did not seem threatening. She had no reason to attack them, or so they thought. Agent 1 woke in the night to go to the bathroom and tiptoed out of the cottage to relieve himself behind a bush. There, he saw Agent 2 with the foxwoman. Let's just say they were getting to know each other intimately. Suddenly, an abrupt change of mood, she bit him. She tore the man's throat out with her teeth before he could scream, turning his cries to a wet, useless gurgle. Then she took her hand and plunged it into his belly, shredding the flesh with razor-sharp claws. He thrashed and tried to fight her off, but she shoved him to the ground and tore his stomach open, rooting around inside for something. When she found it, she stopped and gleefully tore out his liver. As the first agent looked on in horror, she lifted his colleague's liver and swallowed it whole in one single gulp. Not noticing her onlooker, she continued her vile work, peeling her victim's skin like an orange. The agent who witnessed the whole thing regained his ability to move, adrenaline flooding his veins, and ran back to the cottage in search of his remaining teammate. Agent 1 shook Agent 3 awake, babbling incoherently as he tried to explain what was going on, and the fact that they needed to leave, and they needed to leave now. To his shock, Agent 2 walked into the room, asking what all the noise was about. Agent 1 immediately noticed the man's glowing yellow eyes and made his next move without thinking. He pulled out his gun and fired. Agent 3 drew his weapon next, pointing it at 1 and yelling for him to put the weapon away. 1 tried to explain that this man was not their friend, but rather the fox in disguise, but he wouldn't listen. The fox grabbed 1, and 3 shot him in the upper arm. Agent 1 dropped to the ground, wailing in pain as the fox laughed in a high-pitched, devilish whine. Agent 1 scrambled away, crawling into the living room and slamming the rice paper screen door shut. There, laid out on the dining table, was another agent. They had seen this man at the base of the mountain only a few days ago, but now here he was, eyes wide and glassy, and skin flayed open. Then Agent 1 saw the remains of their dinner. In the bowls, there was the flesh of their fallen colleague. With it was not rice, but maggots crawling over the meat. Agent 1 was able to improvise a weapon, breaking off a portion of the wooden beam and stabbing the fox through the stomach as she lunged through the rice paper door. He made his way through the forest, running as fast as he could with his gunshot wound. He found his way to the bank of the river and attempted to cross. However, he was disoriented and afraid. It was pitch black outside, and he was nauseous from the pain. He slipped on the wet rocks and hit his head, falling into the water. The rapids carried him away, pulling him downstream for half a mile, before he was able to grab hold of an exposed branch. Agent 1 made his way back to his team's van, broke a window, and pulled a flamethrower from the back. He recalled legends about similar fox-like creatures mentioning an aversion to fire, and so he prepared to fight her off with as much as he could get. Just as he readied the flamethrower for use, the foxwoman emerged from the tree line. What happened next is unknown, lost from the official record. However, after several days, a retrieval team tracked down Agent 1 and rescued him, capturing the foxwoman in the process. He was taken to the hospital, where he remained with a serious infection for several days before he was discharged. Initially, the Foundation planned to terminate the creature. However, Agent 1 vehemently opposed that decision. He insisted that they should keep her alive. He also recommended the containment methods used to imprison her be adjusted. The agent promised that she would not be held by the chosen methods, and that the result of her inevitable escape would be devastating. In his official interview, he had this to say on the subject. "Like I said, she's spiteful. Every little slight in her eye she saves up. The only way she knows how to repay an insult is death. Chaining her to the wall like an animal. When she gets out, and she will get out, she's going to kill everyone who had the slightest thing to do with it. She won't settle for anything else." Much to the Foundation's surprise, Agent 1 visited the foxwoman in her holding cell several times. The Foundation attempted to understand this concerning behavior, but Agent 1 refused to admit that there was something strange about it. His attachment to the foxwoman had been attributed to Stockholm Syndrome, brought on as a result of several days in the woods spent as her captive. To this day, Agent 1 is the only person to survive that long alone with the creature that is now known as SCP-953. SCP-953 is a female red fox, weighing approximately 8 kilograms. Unlike an ordinary fox, her spine splits at the base into 9 different tails, previously referred to as a kitsune, the shape-shifting fox spirit of Japanese legend. It has since been discovered that she is actually a kumiho, a Korean fox spirit with similar qualities. SCP-953 is a polymorph, also known as a shapeshifter, though she retains some aspects of her fox-like appearance no matter what form she is in, including ears, paws, tails, eyes, and fur. Though she attempts to cover these revealing physical traits with clothes and hairstyling, she is unable to get rid of them entirely. In addition to her shapeshifting, 953 has potent psychic abilities, including the powers of suggestion and telepathy. She has used these abilities to wreak havoc on her victims, causing them to experience terrifying hallucinations, hurt themselves, and in one particularly horrific case, convincing a mother to kill, cook, and eat her own child. She has also successfully used these abilities to escape containment 6 times. SCP-953's most recent escape caused the deaths of 10 Foundation staff. After destroying nearby security cameras, she shifted into the appearance of an adult man, walking out the front door in a stolen lab coat. Anyone who stopped her to ask for identification was swiftly slaughtered. After her escape, the fox disappeared for 5 years until she resurfaced at YIFCON, a convention for furries and anthropomorphic animal enthusiasts. There, the fox-like ears and tail that might draw attention in other places allowed her to hide in plain sight. The Foundation was alerted to her presence when a terrified hotel housekeeper called 911 after walking in on SCP-953 slicing open the torso of a dead convention-goer. By the time the Foundation reached the convention center and captured the fox, she had left 24 corpses in her wake. The bodies, all mutilated almost beyond recognition, were found scattered throughout the hotel in various places, including stuffed into a mattress, hanging over a shower curtain rod, rolled up in a carpet, and strewn across a banquet table. The survivors were given Class A amnestics to wipe their memories and released from custody. The convention was cut short, with a dangerous gas leak as the cover story. So far, the fox has not escaped Foundation custody again. SCP-953 is kept in a Type 4 containment cell in Hallway 99 of Site-17. She is provided 1.5 kilograms of fresh liver every day to eat, as well as clean drinking water and a futon with blankets and sheets that are changed out weekly. In exchange for good behavior, she is provided the occasional luxury item such as plum wine, novels, or a variety of Korean sweets. After so many successful escapes, the Foundation realized that simple physical containment was not adequate to keep SCP-953 away from the general population. Making use of her fear of dogs, The Foundation keeps 953's containment chamber surrounded by dog kennels filled with Korean Jindo and American foxhounds. All staff assigned to SCP-953's containment chamber are to be given background checks, looking for any prior ties to the furry community. Such affiliations may make them vulnerable to SCP-953's influence, and have been attributed to the death of one Agent Gallagher. Because of her psychic abilities, no direct contact with 953 is allowed. All communication with the Fox must take place from a distance of 100 meters, and food, water, and other items are delivered to her via a robotic assistant. She must be considered armed and dangerous at all times, and can only be transported while accompanied by 6 members of armed personnel. There are folklore-based procedures in place for employees as well, providing specific instructions to staff assigned to SCP-953. No matter how odd or ridiculous these instructions may seem, the staff is to adhere to them and remember that what we may think of as classic fairy tales are often more like ancient special containment procedures. If versions of the Kumiho and the Kitsune exist, then who knows what other seemingly mythical creatures the SCP Foundation might encounter in the future? What other beasts are lurking on the edges of civilization, hiding in the shadows, or worse, hiding in plain sight, just under our noses? Best to brush up on your local folklore, just in case. And as always, be careful out there. The SCP Foundation faces off against a number of incomprehensible, impossibly dangerous threats every single day. They've gotten so used to containing terrifying monsters and world-ending anomalies that it's really just all in a day's work for them. But what if there was something that scared even the most jaded Foundation personnel? Something that none of them could track, understand, or even see. In the 1990s, employees of the SCP Foundation began to disappear without a trace. At first, the higher-ups assumed it was traumatized personnel making a break for it after they'd seen something that finally made them snap. But that wouldn't account for all the blood. At the site of every disappearance, the last place anyone saw the missing person before they were gone, there was a massive amount of blood left behind. Not an "I cut my thumb while chopping onions" amount of blood, but an "I'm missing a limb" amount of blood. Buckets and buckets of what was confirmed to be the missing person's blood were found, spilled all over the scene of their disappearance. The first recorded instance of this phenomenon was captured via security footage of a laboratory late at night. There, Dr. Porter was sat in his lab chair finishing up some tests, running potentially anomalous soil samples through a variety of machines. The room was mostly dark, save for the light of a small desk lamp. Suddenly, he looked up from his work, eyes darting around the room. He couldn't see anything, but he could feel it. There was something in there with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something horrible was about to happen, and not about to stick around and see what it would be. He made a break for the door. Just before his outstretched arm reached the handle, he jerked back into the room as if pulled back by his hair. He looked around wildly for his assailant, but there was nothing there that he could see. The security footage showed him jerked around, thrashing his arms as he tried to fight off an invisible attacker for several seconds. Then, he was gone, and the pristine white tile of the laboratory was smeared with that telltale bright red. He wasn't pulled into a pocket dimension like an attack by SCP-106. He was simply there one moment and gone the next. The blood on the ground the only sign he had ever been there at all. Dr. Porter's disappearance was troubling, but the Foundation hoped it might just be an isolated incident. Of course, nothing ever goes the way you'd hope when you're dealing with SCPs, and within the next 6 months, 3 more personnel had vanished in the same way. The phenomenon, whatever was causing it, had a few simple rules it seemed to play by. It occurred on a cycle of 1 to 3 months. It only happened to Foundation personnel, and it always happened in a dark place where visibility was limited. Understandably unsettled, many personnel stopped coming into work, afraid they might be next. Unfortunately for them, the phenomenon was not limited to the area within the Foundation's walls. It could find them no matter how far they ran, as soon as they were in the dark. You can't fight, outrun, or outsmart the setting sun or your bedside lamp going dead. Research Assistant Sanchez vanished while taking a shortcut down an alley at night. Dr. Costanza was taken while she was reading a book before bed. Her blood-stained sheets, discovered days later, indicated that she didn't even have time to run. Junior researcher Wantabe disappeared from the back row of a midnight screening of Evil Dead 2. Moviegoers at the same screening reported hearing some commotion from the back, like someone hitting one of the seats and kicking their legs, but they assumed it was just a massive Bruce Campbell fan excited about the movie. The noise only lasted for a few seconds anyway. And so the pattern continued, and every couple of months, one member of the Foundation staff vanished, leaving behind only blood and a sense of dread. None of the missing staff, dead or alive, were ever found. The phenomenon was assigned the designation SCP-835-JP, and though they tried to come up with a plan to contain it or put a stop to it, many accepted it as simply another occupational hazard in an increasingly long list that came with doing the Foundation's work. Just when it was beginning to look like there would never be a way to prevent new brushes with SCP-835 short of never being alone in the dark ever again, something weird and wonderful happened. In a Japanese SCP Foundation facility, during one of the phenomenon's inactive periods, a booklet entitled Artist's Impression of SCP-835-JP was found on the desk of a research assistant. It depicted a fictional character known as Keteru Yamiko, intended to be a personification of the phenomenon. Keteru Yamiko, as depicted in the booklet, is a young woman drawn in a traditional anime and manga art style. She is pale, with blue eyes and long black hair, and is dressed in a classic Japanese school uniform. In addition to her design, the booklet also describes the character's abilities and backstory. Keteru is described as a type of assassin with expertise in predatory ambush. A santoku knife is her weapon of choice. She also displays anomalous abilities with regard to the absence of light. She is able to manipulate darkness and use dark and shadows as a weapon that she can trap her targets with. She is also able to teleport using shadows, transporting herself, objects, or her prey through shadows to remove all evidence of what she has done. The origins of Keteru's abilities are somewhat murky, but whether she was born with them or given them, she came into her unusual talents at a young age. Due to her abilities, she was found by a mysterious organization, an unknown enemy of the SCP Foundation, and abducted by them as a child. There they indoctrinated her and trained her to be a master assassin, teaching her how to use her abilities, master hand-to-hand combat, and the use of weapons, and to have the ice-cold demeanor of a perfect killer. She learned to move in the shadows and make her darkness her ultimate home and ally. Once her training was complete, Keteru was sent out into the world with one mission: to take out members of the SCP Foundation by any means necessary. According to the lore of the booklet, her killings drew the attention of the Foundation, though they did not understand who she was or who had sent her. Then they assigned her the designation of SCP-835-JP. The booklet was sent to the site's head researcher, who brought in the assistant for further questioning. The man confessed to have drawn the booklet, saying that drawing Keteru Yamiko had made him feel less afraid of the mysterious entity. By turning it into a fictional character, he was taking his sense of control back, as well as turning his fear into a chance to explore his favorite hobby, drawing. What had once been a completely unknown entity, something without a face or a motive of any kind, was now a classic anime character and something he could wrap his mind around. Also, he just thought it all looked really cool. He was reprimanded for drawing on the job and making light of a phenomenon that had taken so many of his colleagues. He was transferred to a different department, and the booklet was largely forgotten about, at least until one researcher, Dr. Sato, noticed something curious. After the discovery of the Keteru Yamiko booklet, also known as Incident 835-JP, there were no disappearances for 5 months. Another disappearance finally occurred, but the pattern, which had been so consistent before, was disrupted for the first time in a decade. Dr. Sato noticed this delay, and though his colleagues mocked him for it, drew a connection between the longer inactive period and the discovery of the Keteru Yamiko booklet. He quickly got to work and developed a proposal, Protocol Idol 835, which was approved by a head researcher desperate for some kind of solution, and promptly put it into practice. Dr. Sato's theory behind the implementation of Protocol Idol was that, somehow, SCP-835-JP was connected to and influenced by the perceptions of the Foundation personnel. In fact, It had likely originated from their collective sense of anxiety and paranoia in the first place, acting as a tulpa, or a thought made real through intense concentration and belief. Therefore, he hypothesized that by changing the staff's perception of the phenomenon from something horrifying and unknowable to an approachable and even fun fictional character, they could somehow contain it and stop any further disappearances. The goal of Protocol Idol was to create a shared version of SCP-835-JP for all of the staff to focus on, stripping the entity of its original power. Since many staff had already seen the original Keteru Yamiko booklet, she was chosen to be the shared, agreed-upon description of SCP-835-JP. With all of that decided, the protocol was officially put into place. First, all of the documents and reports that referred to SCP-835-JP were edited to include details about Keteru Yamiko, including descriptions of the character, repeated mentions of her name instead of the SCP's number, and various illustrations. In addition to changing the records, a publicity campaign was mounted to cement the idea of Keteru Yamiko in the minds of all of the staff. Keteru Yamiko's design was painted on various supplies, on the side of transport vans, on the doors to laboratories, and as murals on several walls throughout the facility. The booklet was copied and distributed around the facility as a piece of required reading. The original author of the booklet was brought back on board to design and head the creation of a variety of other reading materials, including fictional novels, manga, and short animated videos featuring Keteru Yamiko as the main character. Mandatory watch parties were held for these short animations, and free snacks and drinks were provided in order to boost morale. Several employees began jokingly referring to these watch parties as SCP Foundation Anime Club. Through the efforts of the Idol Protocol, the image and knowledge of Keteru Yamiko spread throughout the Foundation and became the dominant perception of SCP-835-JP. Since the implementation of this protocol, there have been no disappearances in line with SCP-835-JP's pattern, and the project was declared a success. Dr. Sato included this note in SCP-835-JP's file. SCP-835-JP is probably a manifestation of the instinctive fear that something threatening oneself may be lurking in the darkness. But the imaginary monster we once feared has now been reduced to a cliched character with Protocol Idol 835. Ever since the implementation of Protocol Idol 835, SCP-835-JP is considered neutralized. Its classification has been downgraded from Keter to Safe. There have been talks about strengthening the entity's containment by expanding the protocol outside of the Foundation, in order to prevent the possibility of containment breaches down the line that might be brought on by exposure to a major cognitohazard, or in-house amnestics. A special team of illustrators, animators, and writers have been brought on to spearhead the protocol, creating additional comic books, posters, and even beginning the early stages of production on a feature-length animated film about SCP-835 and her various exploits, tentatively titled Keteru Yamiko, Shadow Girl. There have been no plans made yet for international distribution, but who knows? We might just see Keteru Yamiko on the big screen one of these days. She might just end up as the first ever SCP to become a mainstream celebrity. And until then, the Foundation could also disseminate knowledge about her through other means. Say a fun little animated YouTube video. But what's the chance they'd ever pull a move like that, right? Gather round, boys and girls, and those who are young at heart. We've talked a lot before about the wacky, occasionally wonderful, but always weird creations of the mysterious toy maker Dr. Wondertainment. And today, we're going to do it again. It's time to crack open the SCP Foundation's toy chest and see what we can find inside. Dr. Wondertainment's inventions have been attracting the attention of the Foundation for quite some time, and with good reason. Whoever or whatever the whimsical, talented doctor is, there's no one else out there producing quite as many anomalous objects and marketing them to children as playthings. These aren't the toys you'll find in your neighborhood store or on someone's Amazon wish list. There's SCP-445, the super paper that comes alive in the form of whatever you fold it into. SCP-1508, or Mikey the Chore Buddy, a living cardboard robot designed to help kids with their chores. There are the adorable yet destructive fire-breathing dragon snails, or SCP-111, or SCP-958, General Beep, who teaches kids about military history and combat, and helps them build real working toy weapons. I could keep talking through the proverbial toy factory, but we'd be here all day. Maybe Dr. Wondertainment's most anomalous trait is how productive he manages to be. I can barely send a single email without 3 cups of coffee, but enough about me. One of the most well-known Dr. Wondertainment creations is the Little Misters line, a series of humanoid playmates with a variety of different traits. We've covered the Little Misters here on SCP Explained before, but let's do a quick refresh, just in case. There's Mr. Chameleon, Mr. Headless, Mr. Laugh, Mr. Forgetful, Mr. Shapy, Mr. Soap, Mr. Hungry, Mr. Brass, Mr. Hot, Mr. Life and Mr. Death, Mr. Fish, Mr. Moon, Mr. Red, Mr. Money, Mr. Lost, Mr. Lie, Mr. Mad, Mr. Scary, and Mr. Stripes. Each of these little misters, from the top hat-wearing fish to the man who can't remember a thing, they're each special in their own way. But wait a minute, looking at them all lined up like that, I can't help but feel like I'm missing something. It seems like a bit of a boys' club, right? And why let boys have all the fun? Well, it seems like Dr. Wondertainment thought the very same thing, because he made a little mister just for girls. Enter Miss Sweetie, the sweetest, pinkest gal around. At first glance, you might mistake Miss Sweetie for an ordinary woman, aside from her naturally pink hair and eyes. No wig or contact lenses here, but like the rest of her fellow misters, Miss Sweetie has more to her than meets the eye. So what lies beneath that candy-coated, sugary exterior? To crack open that hard candy shell and get the truth inside, we'll have to look a few years back to when Miss Sweetie first caught the attention of the Foundation. It all started in a small, unassuming town tucked away in a valley flanked on either side by mountains and thick forests. It was a peaceful place, if a bit boring. The worst thing anyone could remember happening in years was a cheating scandal at the yearly pie bake-off. Then, 10-year-old Nina went missing. Her family was terrified. They called the police right away, but the authorities insisted that it looked like a classic case of a little girl running away from home. After all, she had taken her backpack, her favorite toys, some sandwiches, and bottles of water from the fridge. She would come back home soon, probably later that day, and everyone would be able to laugh about this by tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and Nina still didn't return home. People began to whisper, the way folks in small towns always talk behind each other's backs. Was there some trouble at home? Nina had seemed like such a happy girl, so outgoing, leading her troop in Girl Scout cookie sales every year and singing solos in the school choir. Something must have been wrong, though. Otherwise, where did she go? Then others began to disappear. Tommy Bowers was last spotted walking home from school. He fell behind his friends, stopping to tie his shoe. When they noticed he was no longer with them and went back, he was gone. Then Mikey Paulson vanished on a camping trip in the nearby forest. His father left him alone for a second in broad daylight, just to gather some firewood for later that evening. And when he called out to his son for help carrying it, there was no reply. One boy was catching toads in the creek behind his house when he disappeared. Another was seemingly snatched while walking his dog. The dog, unharmed, ran back home on her own, dragging her leash behind her as she went. It had started with Nina, but now no one could be certain if it would stop. The townspeople began to panic, wondering who would be next, who was taking their children, and why. As it always does in small communities in the grips of terror, suspicion began to grow. Neighbors turned on each other, pointing fingers at anyone who seemed the least bit suspicious. Local police were baffled by the sudden slew of apparent kidnappings. Sure, they had a few potential suspects, an elderly woman with the local kids claiming that she was a witch, a school groundskeeper that just had a generally weird vibe about him, but none of the leads ever went anywhere. There was no evidence found at any of the scenes. Where there were footprints, there were only one set, the child's, leading off into the woods until they could no longer be tracked. Tensions were mounting, and no one could trust anyone anymore. In a town where people had always left their doors unlocked, people were boarding up their windows, pulling their children out of school, and keeping them home at all hours of the day. If they didn't, after all, their child could be the next one to vanish. After a week of nail-biting tension and looking for threats around every corner, the town was treated to a shocking surprise. Nina came home. Casually as you please, her parents saw her come skipping down the driveway, a little dirty and clearly exhausted, but cheerful. They embraced her weeping and she hugged them tight, asking them to please stop crying. "We didn't know where you were," her mother sobbed. "Didn't know if you were okay or—" "I'm fine," Nina insisted. "They let you go?" her father asked. "What? I just got hungry and I missed you, so I came back," Nina explained. "Who took you?" her mother asked. "No one took me. I was visiting my friend," Nina laughed. Her parents stared at her in shock. "What friend?" her father stammered. "The pink lady in the woods," Nina said simply, and then she rushed inside to grab a snack and say hello to the family cat. Police came by the house to speak with Nina, and after talking in circle about her friend in the woods and refusing to say that she was kidnapped, she agreed to show the officers where this lady in the woods was. Other than her location, all they could get out of Nina was that the lady was pink, she could do magic, and she had lots of friends. They had no way to know for certain, but they hoped that this mysterious woman would lead them to the missing boys. So that same day, a team of police officers, none of whom had ever seen more action than a parking ticket or a teenage vandal spray painting a wall, set out to recover the kidnapped children from the lady in the woods. It wasn't easy to navigate, following the directions of a child. What exactly did she mean by "go past the rock shaped like a butt" or "look out for those purple flowers I like"? In spite of their obstacles, though, they were able to get their bearings. They realized they were getting close, though close to what, they couldn't quite be sure, when Officer Rita Flynn stepped on something that crunched loudly beneath her boot. "What the?" She lifted her shoe to find a piece of bright blue hard candy broken beneath the sole. Candy in the middle of the woods. As they searched the area around them, the rest of the officers found pieces of the same candy in different shapes and colors, all strangely inviting for candy that they found on the ground. They couldn't explain the significance of the candy, but they knew it meant they were getting close. They followed the multicolored candy trail like Hansel and Gretel tracking their path through the forest with crumbs of bread. They could hear footsteps up ahead, coming from a nearby clearing. Through the trees, the team of officers could make out a log cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for quite some time. As they drew closer to the cabin and the sounds of activity inside, several of the officers suddenly froze in their tracks. They insisted to be allowed to turn back, to go home. They couldn't explain why, but they knew they needed to leave, that something did not want them there. Officer Flynn, the only female officer in the group, scoffed at her colleagues. She urged them not to be cowards and to keep moving. There were children's lives at stake. This was no time to get cold feet. Still tentative but feeling thoroughly shamed, the rest of the officers followed Rita towards the cabin. So far, so good. No sign of the missing boys, but no sign of foul play yet either. Then, behind her, Flynn heard Officer Simon let out a groan of pain. She turned and saw him doubled over, clutching his stomach. Before anyone could intervene, his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, suddenly unconscious. Flynn ran to check his pulse, and it was steady, but he wouldn't wake up. His breath gave off a slightly sweet smell, and she remembered her great uncle and a trip he'd taken to the hospital. Somehow, Officer Simon had fallen into a diabetic coma right there in the woods. Before she had time to think too hard about it, Officer Paul collapsed in the exact same way right before her eyes. All around her as they attempted to approach the cabin, Flynn's fellow officers were dropping like flies. She turned back to the cabin, and her eye caught the shock of pink hair as a woman stepped out. She made eye contact with Flynn, who took note of her unusual vivid pink eyes, and she waved. "Hi there, what's your name?" she called in a syrupy, sweet voice. Officer Flynn drew her weapon. "Hands where I can see them." The pink-haired woman cocked her head in confusion, but complied. "No need to be so mean," she pouted. "It's just us girls." But that wasn't entirely true. In the forest behind the cabin, Officer Flynn could see humanoid figures trudging through the trees. But they weren't human. They were shiny, hard, and brightly colored. She thought of the candy she had stepped on earlier, and her jaw dropped. As the candy people approached her, she began to recognize their faces. The missing boys, each and every one of them, transformed somehow into living hard candy. Holding her weapon in one hand and keeping an eye on the pink-haired woman and her tiny candy army all the while, she pulled out her radio and called in the strangest report she had ever made. No one in the town, not even the chief of police, had ever heard of anything like this. But fortunately, the police chief knew someone who did. An old friend who devoted her time to investigating cases that were impossible to explain. Less than 24 hours after Officer Flynn made her call, the SCP Foundation was arriving at the scene to collect the candy children and the woman who would become known as Miss Sweetie. Officer Flynn's report, along with an in-depth study of both the hard candy pieces and the hard candy humanoids obtained from the crime scene, offered some insights into Miss Sweetie's abilities. Her presence inherently repels men that come within 50 yards of her, and any man that enters her radius will feel an immense desire to leave and go back in the opposite direction. If he is forced to continue his approach, then he will begin to feel ill, experiencing nausea, shortness of breath, and severe stomach pain. Finally, he would fall into what resembles a spontaneous diabetic coma. The only way for him to regain consciousness is to be brought back outside of the 50-yard radius. As for the hard candy, Foundation researchers gave one piece to a female D-class and another piece to a male D-class to test the effect it might have on different genders. When the woman ate her piece, she simply chewed, swallowed, and looked at the attending researcher in confusion as if to say, "What, was that it?" When the man ate his piece, however, his body began to undergo a rapid transformation. His blood sugar levels skyrocketed, rendering him immobile almost immediately. Over the next 12 hours, his flesh, bones, musculature, and all other parts of his body began to crystallize into hard candy. When the transformation was complete, the new entity attempted to free Miss Sweetie from her containment. He was neutralized using a flamethrower, which melted the sugar of his body down into a sticky puddle. Any person identifying as a male who eats a piece of this hard candy will experience a similar effect, just as the missing boys did. In some very rare cases, the transformed party will turn into a candy unicorn, rather than a humanoid creature, but the cause of these special cases is unknown. After Miss Sweetie was brought into Foundation custody and given her official designation of SCP-2396, specialized containment procedures were put in place to keep her in captivity. She was placed in Provisional Site 2396, and due to her distaste for men and boys, assigned a research staff that consisted entirely of women. Any men or masculine identifying individuals located within a 6-kilometer radius of the site were to be temporarily detained and questioned about any possible contact with SCP-2396. So every night in Provisional Site 2396 was Ladies' Night, but it wasn't much of a party. Researchers were preoccupied with finding a way to neutralize SCP-2396's anomalous effects. Most notably, in spite of her containment, small pieces of assorted hard candy, or SCP-2396-A, would be spontaneously generated within a 6-kilometer radius of Miss Sweetie. Any of these that were spotted would be incinerated on site, but the mobile task force in charge of supervising the area was having trouble keeping up. Male civilians were slipping through the cracks, eating the candy, and transforming into candy humanoids, or instances of SCP-2396-B, then storming the site and attempting to free Miss Sweetie from captivity. It was becoming untenable to keep her contained. The generation of instances of SCP-2396-A was directly connected to her regular consumption of sugar in all of its forms, which she requested as rations. The amount did not matter, nor did the form it took. She merely required something sweet once a day. Sometimes it was a bowl of pure cane sugar, sometimes a cup of maple syrup. On a staff member's birthday, they brought her a piece of chocolate cake, which she was especially delighted by. Eventually, they settled on a single liter of glucose syrup once a day, hoping it could slow things down by eliminating any whimsy or variation from the feedings. Every time, without fail, more instances of the anomalous candy would manifest soon after SCP-2396 ate her meal. There was talk of starving her to see if this could mitigate the generation of candies, but when denied sugary foods, Miss Sweetie would double over in pain, wailing about the agony she felt. The head researcher at the provisional site was horrified by the notion of torturing an anomaly that had done no intentional harm to anyone and insisted they find another way. One researcher, Dr. O'Hurley, proposed a solution. Why not try a sugar substitute? they decided to test it out, giving SCP-2396 a liter of liquid sucralose. While behaving as though it was her ordinary dose of sugar, she accepted it graciously and made no complaints of pain at all. After switching to the sucralose, the candy stopped appearing. Miss Sweetie was reclassified as Euclid and moved to Site-19. After a week of the sucralose-based containment procedures, Dr. O'Hearly conducted her 5th interview with SCP-2396. For the sake of avoiding any potential outbursts, Miss Sweetie was led to believe that she was still producing candy, as well as living candy creatures. A transcript of this interview is included in SCP-2396's official file. Dr. O'Hearly sat down at the table, where Miss Sweetie was already waiting with a pleasant smile on her face. "Good morning, SCP-2396. Dr. O'Hearly began. Miss Sweetie scoffed and giggled at this opener. "Oh, come on, Cindy. You don't have to be all stuffy with your best gal." Dr. O'Hearly responded with a polite smile, neglecting to correct SCP-2396 on the fact that Cindy was not, in fact, her real name. "Alright, SCP-2396, are you aware another SCP-2396-B attempted to breach your containment?" She referred here to one of Miss Sweetie's candy soldiers. Miss Sweetie giggled. "That's just boys. Always gotta be making a big stink of things when they want to get your attention. Ain't it always like that? Never a man, always a boy. Always beating up their friends when they think they're getting too close. A man's always gotta have his hands busy, or else they're gonna be in the air." Dr. O'Hearly pressed the matter. "They seem to be concentrating on taking you away from here. Are you unhappy here, SCP-2396? Miss Sweetie sighed. "A woman ain't happy anywhere. Isn't that what they say?" Dr. O'Hearly frowned. "I'm not aware of any such saying." Miss Sweetie shrugged. "It should be one." "I don't know, Lucy. I just think it's because every gal wants this big strong lug to sweep her off her feet. And these are sweet boys deep down. Even if they're sticky, I'm sure they'd sweep you off your feet too, if you girls asked." Dr. O'Hearly thought about commenting on the inherent sexism and heteronormativity of this statement, but thought better of it. She also considered pointing out that Lucy was not her name either, but shook it off. "Then what about the instances that resemble unicorns?" Miss Sweetie lit up at the mention of these. "Don't you just love unicorns? All little girls love unicorns. You can eat them too, when you get bored. Little girls get bored. It's good to have boys and unicorns you can eat when you're finished." "Isn't that a little reductive?" Dr. O'Hearly replied. Miss Sweetie appeared to become irritated. She rolled her eyes. "Look, Toots, I'm a girl's toy, and it's a man's world. What do you want from me? Is that why you repel men? Because you're a girl's toy?" Miss Sweetie nodded. "Dr. W didn't like it when boys break their sisters' toys. Told me it was damn near the worst thing in the world. And they can't break me. They can't even come near me. Well, except if they're, all sweet and handsome. And you're happy with the way things are?" Dr. O'Hearly asked. Miss Sweetie paused for a moment to consider, then answered, "Dr. W's good in my book. I always had a sweet tooth, and I always wanted to be a girl. Kind of an okay trade-off, if you ask me. You guys ain't so bad, though. Even if the food's crap. Don't know how you mess up sugar, Sarah, but you guys make it taste like crap." Aside from complaining about its taste and no longer being able to produce any of her anomalous candy, the sucralose substitute had no adverse effects on SCP-2396. At this point in time, no containment measures beyond this dietary change, and making sure all staff that interact with her identify as women have been necessary. So, Miss Sweetie sits in her cell in the low-security wing of Site-19, missing her favorite sugary treats, but otherwise content with the way things are. And on the outside, no more unsuspecting boys are being transformed into confectionery against their will. Just to be safe, though, if you're ever out walking and you see pieces of delicious-looking hard candy scattered along the ground, just remember what your parents always said. Don't take candy from strangers. You just never know where it came from. All small towns have their horror stories. Tales of places plagued by terrifying apparitions, unseen forces, and something waiting in the shadows to terrorize unsuspecting innocents. Sometimes it's a bridge at the edge of town, where a man in a bunny suit stalks, wielding an axe and looking for drivers who wander off of the main road. Sometimes it's a cabin in the woods rumored to house an old gnarled witch who steals people away and throws them into a giant soup pot. Maybe it's a cursed hotel where wicked spirits roam the halls, and the guests check in but never check out. Or maybe, like the little town where 16-year-old Mark lived, it's a haunted house. Ever since he was a little boy, Mark had been terrified of the house at the end of the lane. He walked past it on his way to school each morning and on his way back in the late afternoon. The sight of it made his palms sweat, his heart beat just a little bit faster. It had once been a grand Victorian manor, with turrets and a wraparound porch painted a brilliant white. But over the years, the paint had faded to a dingy yellow, peeling away from the rotting wood. There were holes in the roof where the rain and snow dripped through between the shingles. The windows were caked with dust and grime, obscuring anything that might be hiding inside. Not that there should have been anything there. The house had been abandoned for decades. Still, whenever he passed it, Mark could swear he felt the presence of something in there, pacing, watching, waiting for him to come inside. The stories around town didn't help. His parents told him to ignore them, said that people just liked to talk when there was nothing else to do, to make up things to be afraid of, because their lives were too boring otherwise. But he couldn't avoid it. On a Boy Scouts trip when he was 12, Mark had tried to cover his ears when the other boys gathered around the campfire with him and turned the topic to the old house, but they teased and taunted him until he listened. They leaned in, faces lit ghoulishly from below by the flickering orange flames, and whispered about the ghost that had taken up residence inside the house. A wealthy old woman had lived there a long, long time ago, they said. She was cruel, with a nasty temper. Everyone in town knew to avoid her, knowing she would throw things at them from her window, shout at them, even sick her guard dogs on them. But one group of boys in town couldn't resist giving her a good scare. They dressed up in all black, red devil masks covering their faces, and broke into her house late one night. When she awoke, they were standing at the foot of her bed, holding pitchforks and telling her that they had come to drag her to hell. Her heart stopped from pure terror at the sight, but her spirit lingered in the house, swearing revenge against anyone who ever dared cross her threshold again, especially teenage boys. Mark didn't sleep a wink the whole camping trip after hearing that. He swore then and there that no matter what, he would never go into that house. But everyone can be bought, and everyone has a price. For Mark, that price was a car. He had been saving up as best he could, but it was tough to get a job with no way to transport himself there, and mowing lawns for his neighbors wasn't the most lucrative gig. So when he learned that his neighbor Oliver, home on a break from college, was getting rid of his old car, he begged to buy it. He doubted Oliver would go for it, knowing what a jerk the guy could be, but to Mark's surprise, Oliver gave him an offer. "I'll tell you what." Oliver's face broke into a sadistic smile. "I'll give you the car if you can spend the whole night in the house at the end of the street, alone." "Are you serious?" Mark scoffed. "Dead serious. Make it to sunrise without freaking out and bailing, and the car's yours. We have a deal?" Oliver stuck out his hand to shake. Every nerve in Mark's body was screaming at him to say no, but if he didn't agree, he wouldn't be able to afford a car until he was in college. With a defeated sigh, he took Oliver's hand. "Deal." But as night fell and Mark prepared to meet Oliver outside of the derelict old house, he could feel pangs of regret deep in his stomach. What was he thinking? Was a car really worth living his worst nightmare? What if Oliver didn't honor the deal? Or worse, what if the stories were actually true? He swallowed the lump in his throat as he shoved a sandwich into his backpack. He had food, water, a blanket, a flashlight, and his phone. Everything he should need to survive the night. It would be fine, he hoped. "Wasn't sure if you'd show." Oliver smirked as Mark walked up to meet him on the rickety front porch. "Well, I did. I'm here." Mark fidgeted nervously, staring up at the house, its windows gazing down at him like large, dark eyes. "So here are the rules. You have to stay here until sunrise. You leave before then, the deal's off. No car for you. And you have to stay alone. No calling for help from your little friends or your mommy and daddy. I'll be back to check on you in the morning and make sure you really did it. Got it?" "Got it," Mark nodded. "Good luck." "I'm rooting for you." "Really?" Oliver turned to leave, then glanced over his shoulder for one final dig. "Oh, and watch out for the ghost. I heard if she gets you, there won't even be bones left over. Night!" And with that, he walked away. Mark stared down at the doorknob, preparing himself to walk inside. He could still leave. He could turn and run all the way back home, but then Oliver would be right, and he would be a coward. No, he was going to do it. He wasn't some scared little kid anymore. It was just a big, empty house, nothing more. He slowly turned the doorknob, pushed, and with a long, low creak, the door opened to the darkness within. Against his better judgment, Mark instinctively called out, "Hello?" There was, thankfully, no response, just his voice echoing in the vast, empty room. He let out a small sigh of relief and pulled the flashlight out of his backpack, switching it on. He cast its beam around the front room of the house, illuminating water damage, cobwebs that he could only hope were no longer housing any spiders, and a whole lot of plastic-wrapped furniture. As he walked into the living room, he was struck by just how ordinary it all seemed. It was creepy, of course, like any place made for a living that had been deprived of its purpose for far too long, but it wasn't nearly as bad as his imagination had built it up to be. He had been picturing black candles, symbols drawn on the floor in blood, a skeleton perched on the couch, bats hanging from the ceiling. But there was none of that. No ghosts, no signs of danger. This was just mostly sort of sad. Once a home, now just a house, emptied out and left to decay. He could get through the night just fine. As soon as he thought that, he felt something scurry across his foot and let out a scream. The flashlight revealed it to be a large rat running from his sudden intrusion and looking for a place to hide. He clutched his chest, catching his breath. It's just an animal. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you, he reminded himself. Now that some of the mystery was gone, he was starting to wonder what the rest of the house looked like. What had once been breathless fear was replaced with a certain morbid curiosity. If he had to be here all night, he might as well explore. Hey, he thought to himself with a smile, exposure therapy really works. Scared of a haunted house? Just go roaming around inside the middle of the night. You'll be cured. He sat his backpack down next to the stairs, keeping a grip on his flashlight, and began to investigate the rest of his greatest childhood fear. He walked through the dining room, taking in the ornate chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the long, long table fit for housing at least a dozen guests. He wandered into the kitchen, the appliances rusty from neglect. The oven and stove where someone once prepared their nightly dinners. All the pieces of life strewn about like an unfinished jigsaw puzzle with no one to pick up the pieces. Suddenly, Mark heard something coming from the other room. It couldn't be, but it sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Someone or something walking down, descending the staircase toward him. He held his breath, heart pounding so hard he couldn't hear it in his ears. The footsteps stopped, and the house was silent once again. Then, slowly, deliberately, he heard the same footsteps heading back up until they faded away, too quiet to hear anymore. That wasn't his imagination. He was not alone in the house. Carefully, he tiptoed back the way he came, careful to not make too much noise walking across the creaking floorboards. When he reached the stairs, he saw no signs of anyone else. In fact, there was nothing there at all. Wait, where was his backpack? He scanned the floor, certain he had just overlooked it, forgetting where he set it down, but no matter where he looked, it wasn't there. His stomach dropped with a sudden realization. Whoever he had heard coming down the stairs must have taken it. He thought briefly about abandoning it and just running out the front door and never looking back. But his phone was in there. If his parents found out, he'd be grounded for months. Not to mention, he wouldn't have a phone. But what if whoever took it was dangerous? He couldn't be sure, but something in his gut told him he needed to go upstairs and check it out. He considered the weight of the flashlight in his hand. If someone attacked him, would it be enough to defend himself? He sure hoped so. With shaky hands and unsteady legs, he began to climb the stairs to the second floor of the house. Maybe whoever had taken his backpack was just as scared of him as he was of them. It was a comforting thought, though the comfort was short-lived. As he started down the upstairs hall, preparing to search the first bedroom, he heard a door creak open behind him. He turned and froze in wide-eyed terror at the sight. There was a figure there, emerging from the shadows. A pale woman with long, dark hair wearing a white nightgown, reaching out to him with a clawed hand. "Get out!" a voice rasped. Mark shrieked, dropped the flashlight, and tore back down the stairs. He ran to the front door, but as his hand touched the doorknob, a hand grabbed his ankle and pulled. He toppled over, landing on the ground with a painful thud. "Please," he sobbed, shaking from fear. "Don't hurt me. I'll leave. I'm so sorry. Don't kill me." He braced himself for an unearthly voice, for pain, but instead he heard gleeful cackling. He opened his eyes and saw Oliver standing above him. I knew you couldn't do it. You're such a chicken, he smirked. What? Mark stammered. Come on, did you really think I was going to give you my car? Are you stupid? Oliver scoffed. Clearly. Mark followed the sound of the new voice coming down the stairs. There was Chase, one of Oliver's equally awful friends. He still believes in haunted houses. Did you like my work? I made myself. He held up what Mark could now see was a prop, a mannequin dressed up like some kind of ghostly woman. You gave it a good try, but I think it's time for you to run along home now, Oliver sneered. Yeah, run home. Ugh. Chase's taunt was cut off as he fell against the banister suddenly. What the hell? Who pushed me? He whirled around, but there was no one on the stairs with him. Still, Mark could hear the sound of footsteps hammering past Chase and toward him and Oliver. What happened next shocked him to his core. Oliver was dragged to his feet by the collar of his shirt, pulled by an unseen force. Then, with a loud thwack, something invisible hit him square in the nose. Ow! He cried out. But before he could react anymore, he was dealt another blow to the stomach, doubling over in pain. What the? Something swept his legs out from under him and he fell hard, head hitting the floor with a crack. Then, it was quiet. Oliver was still breathing, but very much unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. Screw this! Chase yelled, bolting out the door. As Mark scrambled toward the door to follow him to run home before he could be attacked next, he saw his backpack sliding across the floor toward him. Thanks for the sandwich, a female voice said, though he couldn't see the source. I love peanut butter. You're welcome, he stammered before grabbing his bag and sprinting all the way home. As the story of the haunted house began to spread, rumors and local news reports alike reached the ears of the SCP Foundation. Foundation staff in the area placed infrared cameras around the abandoned house, and the footage captured a human heat signature. Whatever was in that house, it was no ghost. Using infrared cameras to track the entity, it was quickly brought into custody. Before long, the entity was opening up to the Foundation, and she offered to cooperate willingly in exchange for warm food and shelter. So the invisible woman was taken to a nearby Foundation site and given the official classification SCP-347. SCP-347 is a young adult woman, standing at approximately 164 centimeters tall. For all intents and purposes, she is a completely average woman, with one exception. She is completely invisible to the naked eye. This includes her body, as well as everything inside of it, including her blood, skin, and hair samples. Though the cones and rods of the human eye must be visible in order to see, SCP-347's vision has registered as normal following extensive tests. She refers to herself with the name Claudia, though this is assumed to be an alias inspired by Claudia Rains, the lead actor in The Invisible Man. Her real identity, if she indeed has one, has not yet been confirmed. Aside from her invisibility, SCP-347's only other notable traits are an ability to pick locks, a talent for thievery, and the ability to swallow small objects in order to turn them invisible, and then cough them up at a later time without any sickness or discomfort. She seems to crave human contact and socialization, becoming frustrated when she is ignored. She will act out in these cases by pranking people and rearranging and hiding their things. When she is left alone with someone who is sleeping, she has been known to stroke their hair, touch their face, or tuck them in. She does this, she says, because it just feels right. However, those it is done to tend to describe the behavior as unnerving. Though she is invisible in terms of visible light, she can still be seen using infrared or ultraviolet cameras. SCP-347 is currently contained at Site 1, kept in a 5-meter by 5-meter room monitored with an infrared camera. The room has an attached bathroom complete with a shower and bathtub, a queen-size bed, 2 armchairs, a desk and a swivel chair, several bookcases, a TV, and a DVD player. Her bookcases are filled with books, mainly adventure stories, romance novels, and art books, as per her request. She has also been permitted DVD copies of any movies or television shows that she asks for, as long as they predate her arrival at the SCP Foundation. New releases may be added, but only after prior approval from the research team. Though she does not frequently wear clothes, she is to be provided with any clothing that she requests, as well as a collection of makeup and wigs. She has been encouraged to dress up to her heart's content, as it allows Foundation staff to more easily gauge her location at any given time. While she is inside, the door to her room must remain locked. At least 2 staff members must check her door every hour for signs of tampering with the lock. The door may only be unlocked to allow staff in and out for interviews, research, and the delivery of meals and other requested items. She thoroughly enjoys human company and will chat, joke, and even flirt with those who visit her room. She is permitted to leave her containment if and only if she is accompanied by a staff member with at least level 2 security clearance, as well as wearing a layer of grease paint on her face and gloves on her hands. This allows the staff to see her hands and facial expressions. While she is out and about, staff are instructed to treat her with respect and avoid making any rude or crass comments about her invisibility, or her state of dress or undress. If she attempts to escape, she is to be returned to her room and locked inside. If the staff are unable to detect SCP-347's location, they will be given infrared heat vision goggles and instructed to keep an eye out for unusual phenomenon. Dr. Wrights added an addendum to her official file, warning male personnel to politely decline any advances that SCP-347 makes towards them. His note reads, "She's an invisible kleptomaniac. When you leave afterward, you're gonna realize 3 seconds too late that you don't have your keys in your pocket anymore, and you will be held accountable for whatever happens. Besides, the last thing we need is an invisible pregnancy." Dr. Wrights. Yeesh. When she was first contained, SCP-347 had regular violent outbursts and displayed signs of emotional instability, including compulsive theft and depressive episodes during which she would give all surrounding people the silent treatment. Her condition has improved gradually over time, with the application of regular counseling sessions intended to help her heal from the trauma caused by years of complete isolation and being unseen by the world around her. Several of the research staff studying Claudia have suggested that she be introduced to other SCPs, particularly those who are humanoid and considered to be non-threatening. She might, they posit, benefit from social interaction with other anomalous beings that she can relate and connect to. This, in addition to her therapy, could improve her mental and emotional state significantly. After all, just because she's invisible, that doesn't mean she has to feel invisible too. Claudia has expressed a great deal of interest in this idea, stating that it would be nice to have some friends on the inside who aren't being paid to talk to her. Though no matchups have been approved as of yet, several anomalies have been proposed should the program be put into action. SCP-507 was brought up in conversation by more than one researcher, given his harmless nature, friendly demeanor, and fascination with the paranormal. He supported the idea enthusiastically, stating that he would be thrilled to meet a real-life invisible person. SCP-343 has also asked to meet with Claudia, believing he can potentially help her overcome some of her emotional difficulties and offer her some much-needed comfort. Other potential anomalies to introduce to Claudia include SCP-073 and SCP-056, though Claudia's flirtatious nature might complicate the latter. Everybody wants to be known, to be acknowledged, and recognized for the person that they know themselves to be. For SCP-347, it once seemed as if having that simple desire, that human need met, would be impossible for her. But now, for better or for worse, as long as she's in the custody of the SCP Foundation, Claudia can make something approximating a normal life. She can, at last, be... Do you want to hear a secret? Hold on. Before I quench your curiosity, let me remind you that some things are better off left not knowing. Pry around long enough, and you're sure to find something you weren't looking for. That is to say, not every treasure chest is filled with gold coins, elegant jewelry, and expensive relics. Maybe it's not even a treasure chest at all. Dumpsters do look quite similar, don't they? Peek inside and you might find rotting meat and a smell that stings your nostrils. So, do you want to hear a secret now? Of course you do. No disclaimer could stand in the way of humanity and hot gossip. Look at the world around you. Everything revolves around information. The more we know, the more we can say. And is there anything people want more than something to say? Next time you're at a nice restaurant with a group of friends or coworkers or family, look across from you and notice how hard lips have to refrain from belting out interjecting or adding 2 cents. Humans can't help but throw their words into the universe, as if they will echo in importance for eternity. Some might say that listening is a skill. However, you can't argue that it is simply a prerequisite to speaking. It is a deal we make, a compromise. If we listen, then we get to speak. If we hear a secret, we get to share it. So we spend our lives listening, observing, and gathering information about the people, places, and things around us. Philosophers and scientists like to call it the pursuit of truth. But who are we kidding? It's a chore, a task completed only for the prize that comes with it, the chance to speak about what we've seen, heard, and learned. Most often, this journey of gathering information isn't as profound as we pretend it is. Digging around other people's business is no noble task, but curiosity is like a shiny shovel, and to let a tool like this rust in the shed would be a sin, wouldn't it? So with that said, let's stop pretending we don't love TMZ. Let's indulge in our lust for secrets. Let's get digging deep into the mystery of SCP-1903. Like with understanding any artifact, culture, or ideology, we have to first look at the earliest origins of our subject to comprehend its current state. This is to say, SCP-1903 wasn't always SCP-1903. Once upon a time, she was Jackie Barter, a woman who dedicated herself to her job, trying to make a better life for herself. Jackie Barter valued her work above anything else. She did her job and never complained. She showed up early and always smiled. Whether she enjoyed it, however, was another thing. It's hard to know anyone's true feelings at their workplace, but we can speculate that her clients enjoyed it more. So what was it that she did exactly for work? What was her job title when she filed taxes? What did her day-to-day shift look like? If only it was that easy. She handled her responsibilities behind closed doors, and there was an agreement between her clients, and her boss, Mr. Donner, not to speak of what happened behind said doors. In a way, these customers were paying for privacy. At the same time, and maybe more importantly, they were paying for Jackie. Jackie Barter was one of the primary reasons why Mr. Donner was a success. Sure, he had a knack for business. He knew how to operate in the shadows of anonymity. He knew how to turn a profit. But most importantly, he knew what his clients wanted, and what they wanted was Jackie. But what exactly did she do? What was she offering? Why did they want her? The tight-lipped Donner never made those easy questions to answer. However, what we do know is that she was in the service industry, and she wasn't bringing food or drinks to her clients. Jackie Barter herself was enough for them. She brought her energy, her smile, her personality, her charm, and her glow. She dressed in a white dress and wore novelty bunny ears. The wardrobe never changed. It never had to. While customers came to Donner's establishment to mix things up from their normal lives, when they were there, they didn't want change. They wanted the same thing each time. They knew what they wanted, and it was Jackie Barter. Jackie Barter in a white dress and bunny ears. What she actually did, however, isn't as clear, but if you were to speculate, you'd likely come to some version of the truth. What is clear is who she did it for. A man who we will refer to as AF was her top client. AF managed the chemical plant a few blocks from the establishment. He had a wife, a high-income job, and had the means to live a good life. He had things going for him, everything he could ever want. But like any man built of vices, he wanted more. Mr. Donner's establishment was made for people like AF. It was a place where people could be influenced by the devil on their left shoulder and not be judged for it. It was a place for depravity detached from morality. It was a place where you didn't have to shape your behavior to the expectations of society, family, or friends. More than that, it was a place where people themselves didn't feel guilty for what they did. Mr. Donner created a place where people could act on their impulses, enjoy themselves, walk out, go home, and leave their shame at the door. AF loved every aspect of it. And so he became a local. He went frequently, and he always requested Jackie. Donner operated his business in a vague, mysterious building, the type of place you'd have to Yelp 3 times before entering just to make sure you're at the right address. It looked abandoned, and yet you could feel the life behind those doors. It pulled you in. Inside there were rooms lined up like a hotel hallway. Behind one of those particular doors waited not just one man, but rather a crew of friends. AF always brought about 3 or 4 people with him. Why he brought them isn't understood. Did he feel safer in his sins when he shared with others? Or was it that he was trying to impress them? Or maybe he was up to no good and wanted to have the numbers on his side? What we do know is that whoever these men were, AF had an abundance of them. Each time he visited the establishment, he brought a different group of people with him, but the variance ended there. Because each time, his request was exactly the same: the woman dressed in white. He wanted Jackie, and only Jackie. She was his preferred handler. The reasons for this aren't clear. It might be as simple as a man having a specific taste. They might have gotten along quite well, or maybe there's more to it. Maybe he was up to something. Why he chose her, we don't know. But we do know he loved his time with Jackie. Little did he know his time with her was running out. Soon she would be someone or something entirely new. SCP-1903. What happened that night behind closed doors, we aren't sure. But don't let that stop you from speculating. After AF returned home, his wife went to Donar's establishment looking for information. No different than you are seeking information right now, listening closely, waiting for the next bomb to drop. Only she wasn't at her computer. She was actively fighting for it. Donner, being a man dedicated to privacy, kept his mouth shut and sent her away. But AF's wife didn't give up. She knew something was off, and so she tracked Jackie down after hours. Unlike her confrontational encounter with Donner, she was able to ease into a friendly conversation with Jackie and coax information out of her. Slowly but surely, Jackie opened up and told her everything. She told her all about AF's late nights spent there at Donner's establishment and about the men he'd bring with them. More specifically, Jackie explained to her what happened the night in question, and whatever it was enough for Jackie not to come in the next day. And in the days following, that's when everything changed for Jackie. Over the course of the next few days, she painfully morphed into what we see her to be now, SCP-1903. It started in her face. Nothing that wouldn't concern anyone at first glance. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, but the symptoms wouldn't be overlooked for long. She developed claw-like hands and feet. The skin on her face turned into what looks like a papier-mâché-styled rabbit mask. Her bunny ears no longer were just for show, but rather they are entirely responsible for her ability to hear. She began to produce mercury and blood through the pores of her hands and feet. No longer was she Jackie Barter. The Foundation stepped in and took her into their own custody and deemed her SCP-1903. This, however, did not come without consequence for the Foundation. The discovery of SCP-1903 and the knowledge obtained and passed along should not have been celebrated, but they didn't know this until the party had already started. And when the balloons began to pop, it was already too late. Let this be a lesson. Be careful of the secrets you tell. Unlike most curiosities, this one came at a cost no contestant on The Price is Right could ever have guessed. We are creatures who crave information, and we will dig around until we get it. And once retrieved, it is instinct to hold it up and show it to the world. Mostly, this is innocuous. However, sometimes when someone spills the tea, we all get burned. And that is exactly what happened. SCP-1903 was discovered by the Foundation to harbor a slow-acting info hazard. The effects of this info hazard are triggered when the subject learns 3 important details of Jackie's story. Number 1, AF's full name. Number 2, AF's actions towards Jackie. And number 3, Jackie's response to AF's actions. Sorry LeBron, Bosch, and Wade, but no Big 3 in NBA history has ever been as powerful as this one. It is the catalyst for years of damage. If not guarded properly, it has the force to dismantle entire dynasties. As the Foundation spread this information throughout personnel, so spread the infection across the research team. Anyone who learned too much of the story was and will be afflicted. But what exactly does that look like? Well, subjects will begin showing symptoms of mercury poisoning, and large parts of the skin will flake off exclusively around the facial area 2 days after exposure to the trigger information. After 5 days, Typically, when the pigmentation of the affected area is pure white in color, the dermis will begin to form a protective layer of similar composition to SCP-1903's mask, with the exclusion of any traces of mercury. This layer will continue to form until it covers the entire facial area, and will eventually appear to resemble a papier-mâché animal mask of a similar fashion to SCP-1903's, which typically resembles rabbits, cats, wolves, foxes, and rats. They will go biologically deaf, and they will only be able to hear if they continue to wear these ears. Over the course of this change, the hands and feet will undergo a pigmentation shift, darkening considerably. Their nails will sharpen, growing into claws over time, and the subject's hearing will transfer to the next set of novelty ears, which represent the animal that their masks resemble. Once subjects have found these ears, they will show reluctance to take them off. It is unclear if this is because they have built a bond with their identity, or if it is simply the case of them trying to preserve their hearing. Furthermore, if a pair of ears becomes damaged to the point where repair without spare parts is impossible, the subject will become permanently deaf, and they will be left wishing their deafness had come sooner, saving them from hearing Jackie's secret, saving them from the curse that comes with it. Maybe they even wish to be mute too, because once an affected subject tells a non-affected subject about the trigger information, the normal subject will undergo the changes the affected subject went through up until that point, thus continuing this chain of unfortunate fate. 2 to 3 days later, blood will begin to seep through the pores in the subject's hands, feet, and gums. Within a few hours, mercury will begin to appear in the subject's bloodstream. This does not physically affect the subject or other subjects in a similar state. However, it does severely affect the subject's mental health. Many afflicted subjects have been reported to go to extreme measures to remove the mask that has overtaken their face. AF was one of them. He sawed at it with a knife until his face was, well, faceless. This means of infection by way of infohazard was most notably observed with researcher Hayward when he was reading Revision 2 of SCP-1903. By the time he finished, he saw SCP-1903 staring at him from across the cell through the observatory window. She was trying to warn him not to read it. She didn't say anything, but she shushed him. He pressed the button for a photograph and tried to talk to her through the intercom, but when he did, she just sat back down on her cot. He assumed that she realized he was reading her file and then tried to warn him not to tell anyone. While the story of SCP-1903 was going around infecting people and causing them intense physical and psychological pain, SCP-1903 herself was trying to save them from it. This is the tragic through line of the story. Jackie Barter spent her whole life making other people feel better. In most cases, this meant sacrificing her time and energy to do so. And her payment for these services wasn't fair. What did she get? She was sentenced to life under strict supervision, a life in pain, a life in a body that isn't her own. But this is often overlooked. The most documented and studied pain wasn't of SCP-1903's, but rather the personnel who were affected by her story. In fact, there are few documented records of how SCP-1903 itself feels. However, we have interviews with researcher Hayward explaining how he felt after being affected. And maybe, with time, as Hayward moves further and further away from his time as a normal human being, we will begin to disregard his pain too. In science, empathy often finds a way to elude us. With each new study, we move closer to an objective understanding, but at the cost of traveling further and further from its emotional makeup. Regarding Hayward, he initially felt fine after the affliction, but in a couple of hours, the affected areas started to feel irritated. Nothing that couldn't be managed, though. He didn't think much of it until the second day. By then, it felt like he had spent the day on the beach staring up at the hot sun, but he remembers not having been in the sun at all that day. Even under a layer of clouds and low temperatures, the skin on his face felt to have been roasting as if in the oven. His face was slowly peeling off. If he tugged at the corner, he swore it would have ripped off like a band-aid. The pain and discomfort didn't end there. The testing for mercury wasn't much fun either for him. However, he was quite reluctant to go into details about how the procedure was done, similar to how your dad would respond if you asked him about his colonoscopy. Even now, Hayward's face is still tender. A gentle kiss on the cheek would feel like a pinch, but the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the mental games it played with his head. He experienced hallucinations. He started seeing them around the time he noticed that the mask finished growing. They blended with reality, and it took him time to start recognizing their onset. He could tell he was hallucinating if he focused on people's clothing, because in his hallucinations, their outfits would change until everyone was wearing a white tux or a white evening gown. The dresses would be classy, yet revealing, similar to how the women would dress at Donner's establishment. In fact, most everything in the hallucinations could be called back to Donner's. The people in the hallucinations would be wearing masks of different animal types, just like Jackie and her coworkers. Hayward said it looked like a masquerade where he was the center of attention. Everyone would turn their heads to face him. Even if their necks should have snapped, they'd turn a full 180, and they would just glare. These hallucinations would last close to 30 seconds, and during that half minute, one thing stood out specifically. There would be a man leaning against the wall not wearing a mask. He was the only one who wasn't in stylish evening wear, so he kind of sticks out. He can't be made out clearly, but by studying the description, the Foundation believes it to be a vision of Donner. Could Donner be a more important piece to this story than we give him credit? The person trying hardest to silence the story must have the most skin in the game of secrets, right? Either way, we can all learn a lesson from Donner and keep quiet from time to time. I will say it again. Sometimes when someone spills the tea, we all get burned. Water, the wellspring of life. We've dealt with a number of anomalous water sources on this channel, like SCP-006, the much sought-after Fountain of Youth, or the terrifying SCP-3280, where murderous water threatens to destroy the entire world. But we've never seen anomalous water that behaves quite like this before. In many of the legends of King Arthur, the Sword of Excalibur is presented to him by the mystical Lady of the Lake. This lady emerges from the depths of the water, gifting Arthur with the enchanted sword. It's an incredible, if impossible, image. A woman appearing from within the lake, rising up from the bottom and breaking through the surface. It's safe to say that none of us have ever seen anything quite like it. Well, at least most of us haven't. In a small unnamed English village, there was a young woman who set out on a particularly lovely warm spring day to take a swim in a nearby lake. While wading in the water, enjoying the sunlight and the gentle breeze on her skin, she saw a strange ripple ghost across the surface. She stopped her swimming, staring at the motion. She expected to spot a fish or some other aquatic creature. Instead, the water itself began to rise up, gathering and forming into a shape before her eyes. It was impossible, and yet here it was, happening. She pinched herself and found that she was definitely awake, as the water transformed into the shape of a human woman. It turned to look at her, shimmering eyes finding hers and liquid lips forming into a warm, inviting smile. Though this being was shocking to see, it clearly meant her no harm. It raised a translucent arm and gave her a small wave, as if to welcome her to its home. The young woman approached this Lady of the Lake, reaching out her own hand of flesh and bone to touch this impossible creature. Just as her fingertips reached the water woman's own, the figure dissolved back into the lake with a splash. The young woman ran home, telling anyone who would listen about the incredible thing she had seen that day. Of course, no one believed her. That is, until word of her sighting reached the only people who might take her claim seriously, the SCP Foundation. They sent operatives to the lake, where they managed to capture the shape-shifting entity dwelling there. SCP-054, also known as the Water Nymph, is a being made up entirely of water, with an average volume of 90 liters. When it is out of a body of water, the being tends to adopt the appearance of a humanoid woman, though it is capable of taking on a variety of other shapes, including other humanoids, animals, and various inanimate objects. The entity is also capable of shedding its form and effectively disappearing into a given body of water. In order to avoid shrinking or possibly disappearing entirely from evaporation, SCP-054 is required to return to a larger body of water. Studies of samples taken from the entity's body, or its version of a body, revealed that it is made up of ordinary water. There There is no apparent reason for its ability to move, and no thermal, electromagnetic, biological, or supernatural anomalies were detected. The research team could not determine what might make this water alive and sentient, and the nature of its unusual properties is uncertain to this day. When SCP-054 was first brought into containment at Site-08, it displayed surprisingly congenial and curious behavior, often walking around outside of the water and taking turns mimicking the shapes of various staff and scientists that spoke to it. Its demeanor began to shift towards suspicion and aggression, however, following a series of experiments and an incident involving the research staff. The first experiment conducted on SCP-054 sought to determine what would happen if the entity was denied access to any fresh water. Water was drained from the fountain holding it, leaving only enough water for it to form a humanoid shape, but no additional water in the basin to compensate for the effects of evaporation over time. SCP-054 became visibly frustrated as the water was being drained out of its enclosure. For the next few days, it enthusiastically greeted anyone who entered its containment facility, attempting to use a rapport and sense of familiarity to convince the person to provide it with more water. After it realized that this approach had no impact on the amount of water in its fountain, it became distant and even cold to anyone who attempted to speak to it. 054 only became friendly again once the water in its fountain was restored to a pre-experiment level. Next, the research team opted to test SCP-054's reaction to extreme temperatures, particularly extreme cold. The temperature of the containment facility was slowly dropped until the room fell below the freezing point of water. As the temperature dropped, 054 became sluggish and exhausted. It lost its ability to shift between forms, remaining locked in its preferred humanoid female shape. Its movements slowed more and more as the room grew colder, until the entity was completely frozen solid. Portions of the ice were chipped off and studied, revealing the crystals were identical to those of ordinary ice. After the Sub-Zero testing, the research team decided to take things to the other end of the spectrum and test the effects of heat on SCP-054. The subject was placed in a tank outfitted with heating equipment, and its temperature was slowly raised over the course of several minutes. When the water reached a temperature of 95 degrees, the entity's behavior became frenetic and aggressive. It pounded on the glass walls of the tank and attempted to break through the lid in a desperate bid for escape until the temperature was returned to a comfortable level. After the extreme temperature experiments, the previous calm and cooperative nature of SCP-054 was nowhere to be found. The subject displayed increased suspicion of the research team and would fight back whenever it was removed from its fountain and taken to a lab for experimentation. In spite of this newfound resistance, the team decided to continue their experiments as planned, hoping that the entity would return to its formerly docile self over time. Next, Dr. Seskel, the acting head of the research team, conducted a study involving SCP-054's memory and ability to be conditioned. The entity was presented with a series of increasingly complex mazes and puzzles. When it failed to comply with the experiment or solved a puzzle incorrectly, the entity was punished with an electrical shock or the release of silica gel into its body. Both of these options seemed to cause it a great deal of pain and distress, and it was eager to avoid further exposure to them. SCP-054 displayed impressive learning and problem-solving capabilities, revealing it is likely much more intelligent than it was first presumed to be. Dr. Seskel, observing the experiments and with the effectiveness of his somewhat unsavory motivational techniques, quipped to his research assistant that they would have it trained to fetch in no time. After several days of these experiments and repeated use of both the silica gel and electrical shocks, the entity's progress slowed down considerably and it became visibly exhausted. It was removed from the lab for a 48-hour rest period before experimentation was resumed yet again. This time, Dr. Seskel planned to expose SCP-054's water source to various levels of acids and bases in order to test its homeostatic capabilities, beginning with a 0.5 m solution of hydrochloric acid. Prior to conducting the experiment, Dr. Seskel noted, "I have no idea what will happen, but if this thing incorporates homeostatic mechanisms like I suspect, then we should get some insight into how it maintains its form." He also noted that SCP-054's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, but made the decision to continue with the experiment as planned. SCP-054 displayed a now familiar reluctance when it was removed from its containment chamber and taken to the lab. It thrashed around in the fountain, splashing researchers with water, and retreated from them as they approached. In spite of its efforts, however, it was removed from its fountain and placed in the experimental tank. The solution of hydrochloric acid was then dripped into the tank, and then all hell broke loose. As soon as the acid touched the surface of its water, SCP-054 became incredibly distressed. It formed into the shape of a human face, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream of rage and pain. The water churned so aggressively that the lid of the tank was shaken loose, allowing it to escape the boundaries of its containment. The water formed into two large hands, which shot out of the tank and grabbed the two nearest researchers, pulling them into the water and exposing their skin to the acid now present there. As the men scrambled to drag themselves back out of the tank and their colleagues were busy helping them, SCP-054 took on its usual humanoid form and ran for the door. It then collapsed into a puddle, slipped under the crack in the bottom of the door, and made its way down the hall. It was apprehended roughly 10 minutes after its escape by a team of guards, who froze it using canisters of liquid nitrogen and then carried its icy body back to the containment facility. The two researchers who had been pulled into the tank experienced chemical burns on their skin, as well as significant mental distress. They were given immediate medical attention and placed on a leave of absence, and all experimentation on SCP-054 was suspended until further notice. At the recommendation of Dr. Seskal, 054's object class was changed to Euclid. SCP-054 is currently contained in a watertight isolation room, fitted with climate control equipment. A beautiful, intricately designed fountain has been placed in the center of the containment room, filled with fresh spring water in order to accommodate the entity's environmental needs. All maintenance workers assigned to the area must wear NBC suits while inside, and must spend 10 minutes isolated in a drying room after exiting before they are permitted to return to the rest of the facility. If 054 breaches containment, the area must be evacuated, and the containment chamber will be filled with liquid nitrogen in order to freeze its water solid. As the entity is highly sensitive to the conditions of the water that houses it, chemical levels and volume of the water in the fountain must be monitored on a regular basis and kept at optimal levels for the health of SCP-054. During the course of its containment following the incident around the acid-base incorporation experiment, 054 has developed a distrust of men, as the researchers handling that experiment were primarily male. In order to prevent future incidents and keep SCP-054 calm, no male staff are to be assigned to the team monitoring its containment unit. Because 5 years have passed since the last incident involving SCP-054, its object class has been changed from Euclid to Safe, on the recommendation of the lead researcher assigned to its case. Of course, caution should still be exercised while interacting with the entity. This is the SCP Foundation after all, and just because a moderate amount of water is good for you, doesn't mean you can't still drown. Experimentation on SCP-054 has resumed, though this time its boundaries are being honored, and it is allowed adequate time to rest and recuperate between experiments. All use of punishment in order to motivate the entity has been suspended, as it has shown itself to be more than willing to cooperate if it is treated with respect. Like all of us, it responds far better to kindness than it does to fear and intimidation. It doesn't just take on the appearance of a person, it has thoughts, feelings, and the urge to defend itself when threatened. So think twice next time you find yourself swimming in a random body of water. You should be mindful of what might be living in there. Not just of the fish, the algae, and the tiny water bugs, but of the invisible, intelligent, impossible creatures that might be swimming in there with you, or even make up the very water itself. Now go check out SCP-173 the Sculpture and SCP-682 the Hard-to-Kill Reptile for more enigmatic entities of the SCP Foundation.